At my son's rehearsal dinner, my daughter-in-law pulled out deed papers and ordered me to sign my cabin away in front of 60 guests. When I said no, she said something I will never forget. I walked out and made one call. She panicked when she found out what I had done. My name is William. I am 69 years old, a retired chief structural engineer, and a man who spent his life building foundations that do not crack. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who tried to strip you of your dignity. The harsh clinking of expensive crystal rang through the elite Atlanta restaurant. I sat completely isolated at the head table surrounded by Harper's affluent all-white family. My son Anthony stared intensely at his porcelain plate, refusing to make eye contact with his father. Harper slid a thick manila folder across the cold marble table, pushing it directly into my chest. She maintained a radiant, camera-ready smile for the 60 guests filling the private dining room, but her eyes were utterly dead. She kept her teeth clenched and commanded me to sign the documents without delay. She pressed an engraved silver pen firmly against my palm. She expected me to surrender quietly to avoid a public scene. She thought my silence meant submission. She severely underestimated the man sitting right beside her tonight. I opened the manila folder, slowly feeling the heavy weight of the legal paper against my calloused fingertips. The documents inside demanded the immediate and unconditional transfer of my South Carolina lake cabin. This was not just a simple vacation home built for weekend retreats. The rustic structure sits proudly on 10 sprawling acres of prime waterfront land owned by my African-American family for 3 distinct generations. My grandfather bought that specific plot of dirt during a time when men who looked like him were actively denied the basic human right to build generational wealth. Every wooden beam holding up that roof represents the sweat and blood of my ancestors. Harper abruptly stood up from her velvet chair and clinked her champagne flute with an obnoxious chime. She loudly announced to the crowded room that I was generously gifting them the historic property as a wedding present. The affluent guests applauded wildly, raising their glasses in my direction with condescending smiles. They admired the beautiful illusion she painted. I looked directly at the printed words demanding my signature. I felt a profound clarity wash over my mind. I calmly closed the manila folder, placed the silver pen on top, and pushed the entire stack back across the table. I delivered a flat, resounding refusal that cut straight through the joyful noise. My voice remained steady and low, stripping away the artificial warmth she projected. I told her clearly that my grandfather's land would never belong to her family. The joyous atmosphere shattered instantly. The smiles vanished from the faces around us, leaving behind a tense, heavy void. I watched her carefully curated expression twitch with raw fury. She had staged this entire spectacle to trap me using social pressure. She weaponized the audience to guarantee my compliance. She forgot that an engineer respects structural integrity far more than pleasant appearances. I sat tall, refusing to yield a single inch of my hard-earned ground. I stared directly into her furious eyes. She realized her theatrical strategy had failed miserably. The real battle for control began right then. I remained absolutely immovable. The applause died a sudden, awkward death. The silence in the dining room immediately became suffocating. 60 pairs of eyes shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to process the disruption of their elegant evening. Harper did not retreat. She leaned in closely, her fake smile unwavering for the benefit of the observing crowd, and whispered a chilling threat directly into my ear. Her voice was a venomous hiss. She promised that if I refused to sign the transfer papers tonight, I would never be allowed to see my future grandchildren. She promised to erase me entirely from their lives, but she did not stop there. She added another vicious layer to her ultimatum. She swore that she would legally have me declared mentally incompetent and locked away in a miserable state-run nursing home long before Christmas. She spoke with the absolute confidence of a woman who believed her wealth and skin color gave her supreme authority over my existence. I turned my head slowly and looked directly at my only son. I waited for Anthony to intervene. I waited for the boy I raised to defend his father against this blatant psychological violence. Anthony remained completely silent. He took a slow sip of his red wine, purposefully staring at the floral centerpiece. His silence was a deafening confirmation of his complete complicity. He was perfectly willing to watch his wife strip me of my property, my autonomy, and my future legacy just to secure his own comfortable position within her affluent family. The betrayal sliced through my heart with the precision of a surgical blade. I realized in that very moment that the son I knew was gone. He had traded his loyalty for an illusion of grandeur. The man sitting next to me was a stranger who viewed my life as an expendable resource. I did not yell. I did not argue. I recognized that a massive structural failure had occurred within my family dynamic. When a foundation proves irreversibly toxic, you do not waste time trying to patch the cracks. You demolish it entirely and rebuild from the ground up. Harper smirked, waiting for my terrified surrender. I simply stared back at her with cold detachment. The time for reasoning had definitively passed. The silent adjustment of power had officially begun inside my analytical mind. I prepared my first devastating countermeasure. My absolute resolve solidified instantly. I embraced war. I stood up from the lavish table, ignoring the sudden gasps of the confused guests. I deliberately straightened my tailored suit jacket, buttoning it with slow, precise movements. I turned my back on Harper, my son, and their entire toxic charade. I walked out of the upscale restaurant without casting a single backward glance. The cool evening air hit my face as I marched directly to my parked car. I unlocked the door, sat in the driver's seat, and instantly pulled out my phone. I bypassed all family contacts and immediately dialed the direct private line of Hayes, my ruthless trust attorney. The phone rang twice before he answered with a sharp, urgent tone. He did not offer pleasantries. Hayes bypassed any greeting and delivered a terrifying piece of news that confirmed my darkest fears. He informed me that someone had illegally used my social security number and forged my personal signature to secretly extract a massive commercial mortgage on that exact family cabin. The fraudulent bank transaction had cleared the financial system just 4 hours ago. The invisible war for my legacy had already escalated into outright grand larceny. I gripped the leather steering wheel and ignited the engine. The tires of my sedan gripped the dark Atlanta asphalt as I speed toward my suburban home. The crushing betrayal at the restaurant attempts to claw at my chest, but my structural engineer's mind completely overrides any fatherly heartbreak. Decades of calculating load-bearing weights and preventing catastrophic collapses taught me how to compartmentalize panic. I cannot afford the luxury of grief right now. I must secure my physical financial documents before the infection spreads further into my foundation. I pull into my driveway, cut the headlights, and step into the humid night air. The house sits quiet, cloaked in deceptive stillness. I walk onto my front porch and pull my brass key from my pocket. I slide it into the familiar lock. It stops halfway. I push harder. The metal grinds against an alien mechanism. The lock does not turn. I pull out my phone and activate the porch light. The entire brass hardware has been replaced. Brand new silver screws mock my presence on my own property. The sheer audacity of the act crystallizes my focus. Harper and Anthony did not just scheme to steal my lake cabin. They moved aggressively to lock me out of my primary residence while I sat at their rehearsal dinner. They assumed I would stay at the restaurant, paralyzed by social pressure and their vicious threats. They calculated wrong. I do not panic. I calmly pocket the useless key and step off the wooden porch. The battle begins now. I walk away fast. I move smoothly through the darkness, bypassing the compromised front door entirely. I walk down the narrow side path toward the rear garage entrance. Years ago, I installed a hidden digital keypad behind a loose brick in the exterior wall. I punch in the 6-digit code. The heavy reinforced door clicks open with a soft mechanical thud. I step quietly into the dark utility room and proceed directly down the short hallway into my own living room. I reach out and flip the main light switch. The sudden glare of the chandelier floods the space, revealing a scene of absolute treachery. Anthony is standing dead in the center of the room. He is frantically sorting through my filing cabinets. He is hastily shoving my sensitive medical records, private bank statements, and personal tax returns into a large brown cardboard box. My son jumps at the sudden intrusion of light. He flinches violently, his shoulders rigid with pure guilt. A crisp, white bank statement slips from his trembling fingers and flutters down, landing face up on the polished hardwood floor. We stare at each other in total silence. The boy I taught to walk, the boy I guided through every stage of his life, is currently burglarizing my home like a common street criminal. He thought he had hours to ransack my life while I suffered in shock at the restaurant. His tailored designer suit looks utterly ridiculous as he stands hunched over a stolen cardboard box. The stark reality of the situation settles deeply into my bones. He is searching for the precise paperwork required to execute the medical guardianship fraud Harper threatened me with earlier tonight. They intend to fabricate a legal narrative proving I am mentally unfit to manage my own vast estate. To achieve this, they need my private financial history to forge their comprehensive legal trap. Anthony breathes heavily, his eyes darting frantically around the room, desperately searching for an excuse to justify his undeniable crimes. I step forward toward him with absolute unyielding authority inside my own quiet house. I hold his gaze. He stops. Anthony stammers violently. He holds up his hands in a pathetic gesture of innocence. He claims that Harper simply wants to help manage my finances because they are terribly worried about my supposedly failing memory. He attempts to sound like a deeply concerned son protecting an elderly parent. I look at the man babbling before me. A flood of vivid memories rushes into my mind. I remember the brutal 18-hour graveyard shifts I endured at the sweltering manufacturing plant on the south side of town. I remember my joints aching, my hands permanently stained with industrial grease, and my spine screaming in agonizing pain. I sacrificed every ounce of my physical youth to ensure my son never had to take out a single student loan. I paid for his prestigious Ivy League education entirely in hard cash. I built a financial fortress so he could start his tech company without the heavy chains of generational debt. The highly educated CEO's son now stands in the harsh light of my living room, actively robbing the father who literally broke his back to give him the world. He weaponizes the education I purchased to draft fraudulent legal documents against me. I refuse to engage in a meaningless shouting match. When a steel support beam rusts completely through you, do not politely ask it to hold the weight of the structure. You remove it immediately before the entire building collapses on top of you. I walk directly toward him, my posture straight and commanding. I point a steady finger toward the hallway leading to the garage. I tell him to put the cardboard box down immediately. I demand that he surrender the new house keys he just used to lock me out. I order my son out of my house. I do not raise my voice, but the absolute finality in my tone strips away the last remnants of his fake bravado. He realizes I am not a frail old man succumbing to dementia. I am a highly functioning engineer assessing a critical threat. He drops the box onto the floor. The heavy cardboard hits the wood with a loud thud. He reaches into his tailored jacket pocket. He pulls out the shiny new silver keys. He places them on the dining table. I stand motionless, watching him retreat. I will never let him destroy my legacy. He must leave my property immediately. Anthony turns quickly and flees through the back door. I hear the heavy engine of his luxury sedan roar to life in the driveway. The tires screech against the pavement as he speeds away into the dark night. The house falls completely silent again. I do not waste a single second mourning his departure. I walk deliberately toward my private study. I grab the edge of the massive oak bookshelf and push it aside with a firm, practiced heave. The heavy furniture slides smoothly, revealing the concealed steel wall safe hidden directly behind it. I quickly punch in the secure combination. The thick metal door clicks open instantly. I reach inside and conduct a rapid inventory of the contents. The stacks of emergency cash remain completely untouched. However, my hands touch an empty space where the most vital document belongs. Diana's original notarized physical will has been utterly stolen. My breathing slows down as the stark reality of the situation crystallizes in my mind. They did not just insult me at dinner. The conflict has officially escalated from blatant family disrespect to aggressive felony theft. The silent war for my survival has now fully begun, and I am completely ready. It granted him absolute authority over my medical and legal autonomy, superseding any emergency psychiatric directive initiated by a family member. The physician read the primary clause and his protest died in his throat. He realized he was standing in the path of a corporate legal buzzsaw. Jonathan calmly informed the doctor that any further attempt to detain me would result in a personal malpractice lawsuit that would financially ruin his entire lineage. I buttoned my jacket and walked past the defeated physician without a single glance. Jonathan guided me away from the main emergency room lobby. He knew Gavin would be waiting there playing the role of the devastated son-in-law for the cameras and the nursing staff. We navigated a labyrinth of service corridors and sterile supply hallways. We exited through the rear loading dock, stepping directly into the freezing Carolina rain. Jonathan's armored black sedan sat idling in the shadows, the engine producing a low, powerful rumble. Logan operates entirely outside the bureaucratic boundaries of traditional law enforcement. He walks up the wooden steps carrying a thick, locked leather briefcase. He does not offer a comforting smile or empty platitudes regarding my son's criminal behavior. He slides into the chair across from me, drops the heavy briefcase directly onto the oak table, and opens the metal clasps with a sharp click. Logan pulls a meticulously organized stack of printed documents from the briefcase and pushes them across the polished wood. He hands over a brutal financial dossier that completely obliterates the affluent illusion my son and his future bride projected at the restaurant. The hard mathematical numbers expose a staggering level of total desperation. Anthony's highly publicized technology startup is actively bleeding cash. His arrogant mismanagement and careless expansion have pushed the company to the absolute edge of catastrophic failure. The business is facing imminent bankruptcy within 30 days. Investors have already initiated aggressive legal action to recoup their missing capital before it vanishes entirely. Furthermore, the heavy dossier reveals the shocking truth about Harper's supposedly elite family. They are not wealthy socialites. They are aggressive fraudsters drowning in catastrophic commercial real estate debt. They leveraged their properties multiple times over, and the merciless banking institutions are currently preparing a massive coordinated foreclosure on their entire commercial portfolio. The lavish rehearsal dinner, the expensive designer clothing, and the upcoming $300,000 wedding ceremony are entirely funded by maxed-out corporate credit cards and predatory fraudulent loans secured under extremely false pretenses. They are aggressively and desperately trying to maintain the visual appearance of supreme wealth while their entire fragile empire crumbles into worthless dust. Anthony foolishly allied himself with a deeply corrupt family of utterly desperate corporate scavengers. They explicitly targeted my assets to plug the massive holes in their sinking ships. I quietly read through the hidden bank statements, the aggressive collection notices, and the highly secret internal corporate audits Logan brilliantly acquired. My son is currently drowning in a self-made ocean of debt, and he decided his only lifeline was to actively steal my property. He allowed Harper to humiliate me in public because he lacked the courage to admit his own massive financial failures. The sheer magnitude of their deception solidifies the cold resolve in my chest. They view me as a highly profitable target rather than a human being. The grim reality of their financial destruction forces me to deeply understand the brutally calculated logic driving their malicious actions. The glass scanner did not glow green. The digital interface blinked twice before emitting a sharp crimson flash. A critical error message scrolled across the tiny screen. My heart hammered against my ribs, heavy and cold. The biometric lock had not simply malfunctioned, it had been professionally bypassed. The digital security matrix was completely fried, overridden by an external decryption device. I bypassed the scanner entirely, gripping the heavy titanium handle. I pulled and the thick steel door swung open without a single ounce of resistance. I stared into the dark cavity of the vault. The safe was completely empty. The corporate deeds, the physical bearer bonds, the legal buyout authorizations, everything was gone. The $86 million foundation of my life had been cleanly extracted. I took a step back, my mind racing through the sheer logistics of the theft. I looked down at the pristine hardwood floor beneath the safe. The wood was immaculate. The 10 acres of prime waterfront property my grandfather purchased decades ago is the absolute final piece required to finalize the massive construction footprint. The land is categorically not worth the meager $200,000 they so casually claimed during their manipulative presentation. The corporate developers require my specific acreage to build their sprawling main casino and luxury golf course. They currently value my ancestral land at an astonishing figure of over $5 million. Harper and her bankrupt father structured the entire wedding engagement as a strategic corporate acquisition designed exclusively to steal this multi-million-dollar land asset. They meticulously manipulated my son into believing he was marrying into elite society. In brutal reality, they were actively using his desperate financial vulnerability to orchestrate a complete hostile takeover of my property. They calculated that an aging African-American engineer living alone would easily fold under coordinated psychological pressure. They intended to seize the deed, flip the land to the aggressive corporate developers for $5 million, and use my family legacy to instantly wipe out their catastrophic commercial debts. The utter ruthlessness of their hidden agenda eliminates any lingering trace of paternal sympathy I might have harbored for Anthony. He is actively assisting a family of financial predators in erasing his own grandfather's hard-earned legacy. My eyes scan the printed emails, absorbing the cold clinical language they use to describe my impending forced institutionalization. The staggering financial value of the hidden development project perfectly explains the sheer intensity of Harper's violent threats. Their entire survival literally depends on successfully stealing my land today. The elaborate wedding ceremony scheduled for this weekend is merely a strict deadline created to officially legitimize the massive asset theft before the ruthless commercial banks formally foreclose on Anthony's failing company. They critically need the immediate capital from the $5 million land flip to satisfy their violent creditors and maintain their fragile social illusion. My phone suddenly vibrates loudly against the hard wooden surface of the dining table. The bright screen illuminates the dark room, displaying an incoming text message directly from my son. I pick up the device and read the brief, heavily calculated digital words. Anthony formally announces that he and Harper are bringing a highly respected medical specialist to the lake cabin tomorrow morning for an unexpected health checkup. The text is framed with nauseatingly fake concern for my physical well-being. They are moving with terrifying speed to execute their threat of institutionalization. They intend to use this fraudulent psychiatric visit to legally establish my mental incompetence on paper. I stare at the glowing message, fully understanding the absolute severity of the impending ambush. I set the phone down and nod sharply at Logan. The ruthless battle for my total freedom has now entered my ancestral home. Dawn breaks over the still waters of the South Carolina lake, casting long golden shadows across the wooden porch of my ancestral cabin. The crisp morning air carries the scent of pine and impending conflict. I sit at the dining table with my hands resting flat on the polished oak surface. I wait in absolute silence. The crunch of expensive tires on my gravel driveway signals their arrival. A sleek silver Mercedes stops near the front steps. Anthony steps out first, adjusting his designer tie with nervous, jerky movements. Harper follows closely behind him, clutching the arm of a distinguished older man carrying a leather briefcase. This is Dr. Evans, the expensive private psychiatrist they hired to legally erase my autonomy. As they ascend the wooden stairs, Harper immediately launches into her carefully rehearsed performance. She dabs her dry eyes with a pristine white tissue, playing the role of the weeping, deeply concerned bride with sickening perfection. She clings to the doctor's sleeve, whispering frantic, exaggerated fears about my safety and health. She portrays herself as a loving family member pushed to the absolute brink of despair by an aging, unstable patriarch. I remain seated, watching the theatrical display through the screen door. I observe the calculated precision of her manipulation. The doctor nods, sympathetically, completely captivated by her artificial vulnerability. They step onto the porch and Anthony knocks on the heavy wooden frame. I take one slow, deep breath and boldly grant them entry into my newly fortified domain. They enter the main room and Harper immediately takes absolute control of the narrative. She gestures wildly around the neat interior, painting a completely false picture of dangerous domestic neglect. She aggressively feeds Dr. Evans fabricated stories designed specifically to illustrate my supposed cognitive decline. She claims with tearful conviction that she found me wandering aimlessly in the dense woods just 3 nights ago without a jacket. She insists that I regularly leave the gas stove burning for hours, creating a massive fire hazard that threatens the entire property. She even produces a handkerchief to dry her artificial tears dramatically, stating that yesterday I completely forgot my own son's given name. Anthony stands by the stone fireplace looking extremely uncomfortable, but he does not offer a single word of correction. He simply stares at his expensive leather shoes, silently endorsing the vicious character assassination taking place right in front of him. Doctor. Evans listens attentively, jotting down aggressive medical notes on a thick cognitive assessment clipboard. His expression is one of practiced clinical sympathy, utterly blind to the massive financial fraud currently utilizing his respected credentials. He turns his attention directly toward me, adopting a sickeningly sweet tone usually reserved for dealing with confused children. He sits down across from me at the solid oak table, adjusts his silver spectacles, and explains that he merely wants to check my basic neurological reflexes. He patronizingly asks me to perform a standard baseline memory test. He slowly requests that I begin at the number 100 and continuously count backward by subtracting 7s. Harper stands behind his chair, crossing her arms in triumph. She assumes this humiliating exercise will shatter my confidence and cement the tragic narrative of a broken man losing his mind. She expects me to stumble over the math, to grow frustrated and angry, thereby proving her fraudulent medical claims to the expensive physician. I look quietly at the psychiatrist, feeling a cold rush of pure analytical focus wash away any remaining paternal sorrow. My brilliant engineering mind slowly sharpens into a very lethal and highly precise tactical weapon. I comply coldly with his condescending request. I stare completely unblinking directly into his professional eyes. 93, 86, 79, 72, 65, 58. I effortlessly recite the descending sequence with harsh rhythmic precision, treating the mathematical challenge like a tedious insult to my vast intellectual capabilities. Dr. Evans stops taking notes. His pen hovers uselessly over the paper as his confident demeanor begins to visibly crack under the intense weight of my lucid gaze. I finish the numerical exercise flawlessly. Without uttering a single word of complaint, I reach across the table and smoothly slide my sleek silver laptop from its leather case. I flip the screen open and quickly load the sophisticated architectural drafting software. I physically turn the bright monitor toward the increasingly uncomfortable physician. I calmly display a highly complex, mathematically flawless structural engineering bridge draft that I independently completed just 2 days ago for a major national consulting firm. I lean forward and clinically dissect the doctor's highly unethical presence within my home. I explain the exact structural load-bearing calculations clearly displayed on the screen, proving beyond any reasonable doubt that my cognitive functions remain remarkably intact. I then verbally dismantle the entire medical ambush using razor-sharp logic. I calmly inform the stunned psychiatrist that he has been intentionally brought here under entirely false pretenses. I reveal that his prestigious medical credentials are being maliciously weaponized to facilitate a massive financial real estate theft orchestrated by a desperate woman drowning in catastrophic commercial debt. I advise him to quickly evaluate his own legal exposure before participating in an undeniable felony conspiracy. Dr. Evans stares at the intricate engineering blueprints and listens to my perfectly structured legal warning. He instantly realizes he has been severely manipulated into a highly dangerous financial fraud scheme. He turns his head slowly and glares at Harper with profound professional disgust. He aggressively snaps his thick clipboard shut and hurriedly packs his expensive leather briefcase. He quickly stands up abruptly from the table, aggressively refusing to ever accept any form of payment or a single desperate explanation from the deeply panicked couple standing nervously near the tall stone fireplace. Without offering a single word of polite farewell to my son or his deceptive bride, the doctor immediately storms out the front door and marches rapidly toward his parked vehicle to escape the property completely forever. The heavy wooden door slams shut behind the departing physician. Harper instantly drops her fragile victim persona and explodes in pure, unadulterated rage. She turns violently toward my son and screams at him for his total incompetence. Her piercing voice echoes wildly throughout the rustic cabin, berating Anthony for failing to properly secure the medical fraud they desperately needed. Her face twists into a terrifying mask of ugly entitlement as she completely loses control of her carefully constructed emotions. She aggressively grabs a heavy ceramic vase from the coffee table and hurls it violently against the solid stone fireplace. The extremely expensive antique shatters into countless jagged pieces across the floor, symbolizing the total destruction of their fragile master plan. She screams highly vicious insults at my completely silent son. She does not know that I securely installed a highly advanced micro camera deep inside the wooden mantle just the night before. The tiny hidden lens records every single movement of her aggressive tantrum. Her terrifying, violent outburst is perfectly captured in crystal-clear, high-definition video. I quietly collect my silver laptop from the table. I have just secured the absolute ultimate legal defense against any future physical threats. I leave the cabin early the next morning, the tires of my car crunching against the gravel driveway. The serene landscape offers no comfort as I speed down the interstate, heading directly toward the chaotic sprawl of Atlanta. I check the rearview mirror constantly, my senses heightened by the sheer audacity of my son's betrayal. The battle lines are drawn and I can no longer rely on defensive maneuvers. I need offensive capabilities. I pull into the parking lot of a dilapidated diner on the outskirts of the city, a place far removed from Anthony's social circles. The neon sign flickers weakly against the overcast sky. I walk inside and slide into a cracked vinyl booth near the back facing the entrance. Hayes is already there, sipping a cup of black coffee. His sharp, predatory eyes scan the room before settling on me. He is a ruthless trust attorney who views legal conflict as a highly competitive sport. We exchange a brief nod, bypassing any pleasantries. I place my hands on the table, the anger in my chest hardening into cold resolve. It is time to dismantle the fraudulent structure Anthony and Harper have desperately built. I lean forward, ready to completely weaponize the legal system against them. The silence between us stretches for a second before Hayes opens his leather briefcase, prepared to execute the next phase of our counterattack. The absolute premeditation of their act searing into my mind. I turned back to Leo. I instructed Jonathan to transfer $100,000 into a secure, untraceable offshore account in Leo's name. I ordered my security team to extract him immediately and place him in a fortified corporate safe house until the legal fallout settled. Leo grabbed his duffel bag and followed Jonathan's extraction team out the back door. Jonathan and I walked back out into the pouring rain, the evidence of Gavin's treason secured in my pocket. I reached the passenger door of the sedan. At that exact moment, my primary cell phone, the device currently active on the logistics company network, emitted a sharp, high-pitched chime. It was a Tier 1 automated alert from my private banking server. The screen displayed a critical security breach warning. Someone was currently executing a sophisticated brute force attack on the digital firewall protecting the primary holding account. The account containing the $68 million from the finalized company sale. Gavin was not waiting for probate. He was initiating a massive, immediate wire transfer. Hayes takes a slow sip of his coffee and leans across the sticky table. His expression darkens, signaling that the situation is far more dangerous than I initially realized. He pulls a thick manila folder from his briefcase and slides it toward me. He reveals a terrifying new development uncovered by his investigative team. Anthony did not just forge a mortgage document. He utilized an outdated, heavily forged medical power of attorney to secure a massive $2 million loan. The horrifying reality is that this loan did not originate from a legitimate banking institution. Anthony bypassed the traditional financial system entirely and borrowed the capital directly from an extremely violent underground crime syndicate operating out of Miami. He desperately needed the cash to inject into his failing tech startup and to fund the extravagant wedding Harper demanded. He used the anticipated, forced sale of my 10-acre lake cabin as the sole collateral for this incredibly dangerous transaction. The syndicate accepted the forged paperwork, fully expecting a swift multi-million-dollar payout once the land was sold to the corporate developers. Hayes explains the brutal mechanics of this illicit deal. The syndicate is not interested in legal proceedings or prolonged negotiations. If the wedding takes place and Harper successfully executes her plan to have me declared mentally incompetent and institutionalized, the syndicate will immediately seize the land. Furthermore, they will view me as an unacceptable liability, a potential obstacle to their massive profit. They will not wait for me to die quietly in a state-run nursing home. They will physically eliminate me to ensure their unhindered control over the multi-million-dollar asset. The gravity of the situation hits me like a physical blow. My own son has unknowingly placed a definitive price tag on my life. He has invited ruthless killers into our family conflict to satisfy his own pathetic ambition. I stare at the documents, the cold reality of my impending assassination settling over me. The battle is no longer simply about protecting my property. It is about actively fighting for my very survival. I reach across the table and firmly grasp the heavy silver pen Hayes offers. I do not hesitate for a single second. I sign my name with aggressive, forceful strokes across the bottom of the irrevocable legal order. This document instantly executes Diana's fail-safe mechanism. It immediately transfers the absolute ownership of the South Carolina lake cabin, along with every single liquid asset I possess, directly into an anonymous, heavily fortified charitable trust. The legal barrier is now completely impenetrable. Anthony and Harper have lost everything. Suddenly, my phone vibrates violently against the table. It is Logan. I answer immediately. His voice is tight and urgent, cutting through the ambient noise of the diner. He informs me that the situation has rapidly deteriorated. The ruthless loan sharks have officially lost patience. They have dispatched 2 aggressive enforcers directly to Anthony's corporate office building. Logan confirms that the upcoming wedding day is the absolute non-negotiable deadline for the $2 million repayment. The trap has snapped shut, and Anthony is caught directly in the teeth. I initiate the next phase of my counterattack by sending a simple defeated text message to Anthony. I invite him and Harper to meet me at a quiet, neutral Italian restaurant situated halfway between my suburban house and their luxury apartment. I arrive 20 minutes early to physically prepare for my performance. I intentionally dull my sharp engineering posture. I hunch my shoulders forward to simulate the heavy burden of age and overwhelming anxiety. I let my hands tremble slightly as I hold the laminated menu. I must completely convince them that their aggressive psychological warfare has successfully broken my spirit. Anthony and Harper walk through the glass doors 10 minutes late. They exude the smug confidence of predators who believe their prey is finally cornered. I greet them with a hollow, exhausted sigh. I look directly at my son and explicitly state that I am terrified of the cold reality of dying entirely alone in a sterile medical facility. I play the tragic role of a fractured patriarch who has fully realized the sheer futility of fighting his own blood. I carefully project an aura of total surrender, hiding the highly calculated tactical maneuvers running continuously through my mind. They slide into the leather booth across from me. Harper smiles a predatory, victorious smile, completely falling for the elaborate visual deception. She views my simulated frailty as the ultimate confirmation of her absolute superiority. The trap is perfectly set, and they are totally blind. I am fully ready now. I begin speaking with a deliberately raspy voice, ensuring my tone conveys utter defeat. I present a carefully constructed compromise designed specifically to appeal to their massive egos and deep financial desperation. I tell them I am completely exhausted from the constant fighting and simply want to secure a quiet end to my life. I offer to legally surrender the valuable lake cabin and the entire 10 acres of prime real estate to them. I promise to sign the official deed transfer papers publicly during their lavish wedding reception. I suggest framing the signature as a monumental grand gesture of fatherly love in front of all their affluent guests. In exchange for this massive financial sacrifice, I request one single solitary condition. I ask them to permanently drop their aggressive psychiatric threats and allow me to live out my remaining days peacefully inside my suburban home. I beg them to let me age without the terrifying shadow of forced institutionalization hanging constantly over my head. I look at my son and watch his entire body physically sag with profound relief. Anthony desperately needs this multi-million-dollar deal to close smoothly, so he can finally repay the violent crime syndicate before his absolute deadline expires. He eagerly opens his mouth to accept my terms and secure his own salvation. However, his cowardly voice is instantly silenced by the woman sitting right beside him. Harper possesses a toxic level of greed that entirely consumes her basic sense of self-preservation. She does not want a peaceful compromise or a mutual agreement. She demands absolute total submission and complete financial domination. She violently slams her hand against the restaurant table, interrupting Anthony before he can utter a single word of acceptance. She glares at me with eyes full of undisguised malice. Her insatiable hunger for wealth completely overtakes any logical strategy they previously discussed. She views my strategic offer not as a generous victory, but as an opportunity to twist the knife deeper into my chest. She intends to humiliate me completely and seize absolutely everything I have built entirely by myself. Harper leans across the table and begins to gloat with unabashed arrogance. She mocks my carefully projected physical weakness, describing me as a pathetic old man clinging desperately to a forgotten past. She confidently asserts that she holds all the power and dictates the final terms of my existence. Her voice drips with venomous condescension as she brutally dismantles my attempt at maintaining basic human dignity. She leans closer, ensuring Anthony hears every single malicious word she delivers. She proudly and openly admits to trespassing in my home while I was at the rehearsal dinner. She boasts about successfully manipulating my son into acting as her personal thief. With a sickeningly sweet smile, she confesses to explicitly ordering Anthony to break into my concealed wall safe. She brags about stealing Diana's original physical will, gleefully explaining that destroying the primary document guarantees her total control over the entire estate. She boldly claims that a stubborn old black man has absolutely no right to sit on a multi-million-dollar fortune, while a supposedly superior family like hers faces unnecessary financial hardship. She explicitly states that my ancestral wealth rightfully belongs in her hands, because her bloodline is inherently more deserving of the luxury my grandfather bled to secure. She confidently reveals her entire criminal conspiracy, assuming my manufactured frailty prevents me from ever fighting back. She believes I am completely broken and utterly powerless. She is spectacularly incorrect. Hidden securely inside the inner breast pocket of my tailored suit jacket, a high-definition digital audio recorder silently captures every single vile syllable falling from her arrogant lips. I had activated the discreet device the very moment I stepped out of my vehicle, knowing her massive ego would eventually force her to confess her crimes simply to assert dominance. The tiny red light glows warmly against the fabric, meticulously logging the felony theft, the explicit racial hostility, and the premeditated financial extortion. Every word she speaks weaves an unbreakable legal noose tightly around her own neck. I sit quietly and absorb the vicious verbal assault, allowing her to dig an impossibly deep grave. I look at her with hollow, empty eyes, ensuring she feels the absolute thrill of her perceived victory. The recording device continues to quietly document the precise details of her massive criminal enterprise. She happily signs her own devastating confession while I silently adjust my final trap perfectly. I slowly stand up from the leather booth, maintaining my heavily manufactured posture of utter defeat. I drag my feet across the restaurant floor, acting like a broken man completely crushed by the immense weight of her cruel supremacy. I exit the building and walk into the dimly lit parking lot, carrying the absolute certainty of my impending victory securely inside my breast pocket. I approach my parked sedan, ready to drive home and finalize the legal preparations for the wedding ceremony. I stop dead in my tracks. My vehicle sits unnaturally low to the dark pavement. I shine my phone light downward and discover the brutal reality. All 4 of my heavy tires have been violently slashed with deep, jagged knife wounds. The thick rubber is completely shredded, leaving the vehicle entirely undrivable. Harper orchestrated this vicious attack while we sat inside eating dinner. She wanted to guarantee I felt genuine physical fear before the wedding. She wanted to trap me in this dark parking lot to reinforce my total vulnerability. The escalating conflict has officially crossed the dangerous line from sophisticated white-collar fraud into raw physical intimidation. I simply dial Logan to retrieve me immediately right now. The morning of the wedding arrives with a brilliant mocking coastal sunrise. A sprawling $300,000 beachfront villa has been rented exclusively for the weekend festivities. Every single opulent detail is entirely funded on highly fraudulent corporate credit lines. The sheer extravagance on display is fundamentally nauseating to witness. Massive archways constructed from imported white roses frame the manicured lawn. Teams of uniformed staff scurry across the property, carrying expensive silver trays and positioning towering ice sculptures under the warm southern sun. The pristine white sand stretches flawlessly toward the crashing waves. This entire luxurious spectacle is nothing more than a desperately constructed high-stakes illusion. Harper and her family are completely bankrupt, yet they aggressively parade their fake wealth as if they own the entire coastline. They are throwing a massive, glittering party on a sinking ship, fully expecting my personal family legacy to miraculously plug the catastrophic holes in their hull before the final bill comes due. The absolute arrogance required to execute this elaborate charade fuels the steady, cold determination currently burning inside my chest. I stand alone in my quiet hotel room overlooking the busy wedding venue. The final preparations are fully underway outside. The countdown has officially started. My analytical mind meticulously reviews the sequence of events about to unfold. I have carefully positioned every single structural element necessary for their complete financial collapse. I simply need to walk into their perfectly staged trap and detonate the foundation from the inside out. I am completely ready for the ceremony. I turn away from the large window and face the full-length mirror. I meticulously dress myself in a sharp, immaculate, tailored black tuxedo. I adjust the crisp silk lapels and perfectly align my silver cufflinks with deliberate, unhurried precision. I do not look like a defeated, fragile old man preparing to surrender his dignity. I look like an executioner arriving for a highly anticipated final sentence. I walk over to the mahogany desk and pick up 3 distinct heavy red envelopes. Each envelope contains a different lethal component of their impending destruction. I carefully place all 3 envelopes deep into the secure inner pockets of my tuxedo coat. I feel their heavy physical weight pressing firmly against my chest like loaded ammunition. My phone suddenly buzzes silently on the polished desk. I pick it up and view an encrypted text message directly from Logan. The private investigator successfully bypassed the venue's aggressive private security detail. He attaches a high-definition photograph confirming a deeply terrifying new reality. 2 heavily muscled men wearing cheap, ill-fitting suits are currently standing near the perimeter of the floral archway. Logan confirms they are aggressive enforcers dispatched directly from the underground Miami crime syndicate. They are currently posing as wealthy corporate investors silently observing the lavish event. They have arrived to personally ensure Anthony honors his $2 million fraudulent loan agreement today. The absolute deadline is completely non-negotiable. If Anthony fails to deliver the promised collateral, those 2 men will immediately escalate the situation into raw, physical violence. The presence of the syndicate enforcers dramatically alters the complex tactical landscape. The stakes are no longer simply about protecting my financial assets or exposing a family fraud. The immediate physical safety of everyone attending this wedding is now severely compromised by my son's cowardly, desperate actions. I slide my phone into my pocket. The final adjustments are complete. I step out of the quiet hotel and walk deliberately across the pristine lawn toward the main wedding venue. The wealthy guests are already taking their assigned seats on the white wooden folding chairs facing the beautiful ocean. I enter the immediate perimeter. Harper's family members instantly lock their eyes on me. Their cold faces display a deeply toxic mixture of arrogant disdain and hungry, aggressive anticipation. They look at me not as a respected family elder, but as a walking, breathing financial asset completely ready to be liquidated for their immediate personal gain. They assume my presence here guarantees their total victory. Anthony spots me immediately. He practically sprints across the manicured grass, his fake smile plastered tightly across his nervous face. He violently grabs my arm and aggressively steers me entirely away from the prestigious front rows reserved for the immediate family. He forcefully escorts me to the very back row of the seating arrangement, intentionally placing me completely out of sight of the expensive main cameras and the highly affluent corporate guests. He positions me behind a large floral arrangement, attempting to physically erase my presence from the visual narrative of their perfect day. He wants my signature on the valuable deed transfer, but he is desperately ashamed of my actual existence. He instructs me in a sharp, panicked whisper to remain completely silent and out of the way until I am formally called to the stage during the reception. He quickly abandons me in the back row, rushing back to his position near the floral archway to greet his fake wealthy peers. I sit down slowly on the hard wooden chair. I look around the extravagant venue, observing the intricate web of lies surrounding me. The two syndicate enforcers are standing merely 20 feet away, their cold eyes tracking Anthony's every single nervous movement. They are ready to strike the very moment the ceremony concludes. I do not argue about my humiliating seating assignment. The back row provides the absolute perfect strategic vantage point. I sit quietly in the very back row, entirely hidden by the massive white floral arrangements. The elegant string quartet begins playing a soft classical melody signaling the imminent start of the elaborate wedding ceremony. I ignore the beautiful music entirely. I smoothly pull my phone from my pocket and access the highly secure encrypted server Logan established for me. I input my complex alphanumeric password and initiate the final operational sequence. I execute a massive automated file transfer directly to lawyer Hayes in Atlanta. The heavy digital package instantly delivers every single piece of audio-visual and financial evidence we painstakingly collected over the past week. I officially release the legal hounds. The inescapable net is definitively cast over Anthony and Harper. The federal and state authorities will receive the comprehensive fraud dossiers within the hour. The massive commercial banks will instantly trigger the aggressive foreclosure protocols on their remaining corporate assets. The entire artificial foundation of their lives is silently collapsing while they eagerly wait for the bride to walk down the aisle. I calmly place my phone back into my pocket. I fold my hands neatly in my lap. I simply wait for the music to reach its crescendo. The absolute destruction is guaranteed. The elegant string quartet seamlessly transitions into a grand processional march, officially signaling the beginning of the elaborate wedding ceremony. The affluent guests instantly fall silent as the heavy wooden doors open. Harper glides down the pristine white runner, perfectly playing the blushing bride. She wears a custom designer gown easily worth a staggering sum funded entirely by fraudulent debt. Anthony stands waiting at the floral altar, his nervous hands clasped tightly together. They join hands beneath the massive archway of imported white roses, presenting a flawlessly manufactured image of elite young love. The officiant begins speaking, his voice carrying over the crashing ocean waves. When the time comes to exchange their highly anticipated vows, the sheer hypocrisy of their words is absolutely sickening. Anthony stares deeply into Harper's eyes and speaks passionately about unbreakable trust and fundamental honesty. He promises to protect their shared future from any external threats, completely ignoring the violent syndicate enforcers standing merely yards away. Harper responds with a perfectly rehearsed tear sliding down her cheek. She dramatically pledges her eternal loyalty, swearing to build a magnificent legacy based entirely on mutual respect and familial devotion. She publicly praises Anthony's unwavering moral compass, presenting him to the audience as a paragon of virtue. Every single syllable falling from their lips is a carefully calculated lie designed exclusively to maintain their rapidly crumbling social facade. They passionately vow to conquer the world together, blissfully unaware that I have already initiated the absolute destruction of their fragile criminal empire. I sit silently observing my son at the altar. Looking at his nervous profile, I am suddenly transported back to a blazing summer afternoon decades ago. I vividly remember a 10-year-old Anthony learning to ride a heavy steel bicycle without training wheels on the steep paved hill behind our old neighborhood. He pedaled far too fast, losing his balance and crashing violently onto the harsh, unforgiving asphalt. He tumbled hard, scraping his left knee entirely down to the raw bone. The physical injury was undeniably severe. I rushed over immediately, fully expecting him to burst into tears and beg to go inside. Instead, the little boy slowly pushed himself off the burning pavement. Blood poured freely down his shin, staining his white socks a deep crimson. He wiped the dirt from his small hands, clenched his jaw tightly, and adamantly refused to shed a single tear. He grabbed the heavy handlebars, hoisted himself back onto the scratched leather seat, and demanded to try again. I was incredibly proud of his immense bravery that day. I genuinely believed his inherent resilience would carry him through life's inevitable hardships. Now staring at the grown man repeating absolute falsehoods under a floral archway, I realize how tragically that specific childhood trait has mutated. That fierce, beautiful determination has been entirely warped into a stubborn defensive mechanism designed solely to protect a massive, destructive lie. He is still the exact same terrified boy, refusing to admit he has fallen, but the stakes are now catastrophically higher. Instead of a scraped knee, he is aggressively bleeding millions of fraudulent dollars. Instead of refusing to cry, he is actively destroying his own father to temporarily mask his catastrophic failures. His remarkable resilience is no longer a virtue, it is the primary engine of his own impending demise. He would rather partner with a violent crime syndicate and steal my legacy than simply admit his tech startup is collapsing. I watch him slide the expensive diamond ring onto Harper's finger, feeling a profound, tragic sorrow. The brave boy I once admired is completely gone forever. Following the exchange of rings and the highly dramatic first kiss, the ceremony smoothly transitions into the immediate congratulatory speeches. Harper's father eagerly steps forward to address the large-seated crowd. He is a pompous, remarkably arrogant man wearing an uncomfortably tight designer suit that strains against his inflated physique. He grabs the microphone with a deeply unearned confidence, standing prominently at the altar to deliver his highly anticipated toast. He gazes out over the affluent guests and loudly begins a boastful, completely delusional speech about the grand merging of two magnificent economic empires. He speaks with absolute authority, portraying himself as a highly successful commercial real estate tycoon, generously welcoming my son into his elite financial echelon. He explicitly lies to the entire audience, claiming he has happily provided extremely generous financial backing to fully support the newlyweds as they begin their prosperous life together. He paints a glorious picture of endless corporate wealth and supreme social dominance, actively praising his own supposed generosity. His booming voice carries over the gentle ocean breeze, echoing the exact same toxic vanity his daughter constantly displays. He completely omits the catastrophic truth that his entire commercial real estate portfolio is currently undergoing a massive coordinated bank foreclosure. He ignores the brutal fact that this extravagant wedding is entirely funded by predatory loan sharks. I sit perfectly still in the very back row, listening to his loud, booming fabrications. I slightly turn my head and glance toward the massive floral archway. The two violent syndicate enforcers are leaning casually against a white stone pillar merely yards away from the boasting patriarch. They listen to the pompous man loudly proclaim his endless financial resources and share a dark, chillingly amused smirk. They intimately know the exact, terrifying reality behind the smoke and mirrors. They fully understand that this incredibly arrogant father is actively drowning in an ocean of inescapable underground debt. The enforcers watch him gesture grandly toward the crashing waves, viewing him not as a wealthy titan, but as desperate, pathetic prey. They represent the absolute hardest reality crashing violently against this fragile world of elaborate fiction. The patriarch finishes his speech to thunderous applause, raising his glass to celebrate a future that will never exist. The sickening irony constantly hangs extremely thick in the humid coastal air, entirely invisible to the clapping crowd, but blazingly obvious to me standing right here today. The enthusiastic crowd slowly transitions to the lavish outdoor reception area. Dozens of uniformed waiters immediately begin pouring incredibly expensive vintage champagne into tall crystal flutes. This is the exact extravagant moment Harper has strategically chosen to force the highly public signing of the deed transfer. She wants to showcase my ultimate defeat to her peers. The final trap is now completely about to spring shut. I sit quietly in my wooden chair, completely ignoring the joyful commotion swirling all around me. I casually reach into my dark tuxedo pocket and take out my secure mobile phone. I quickly enter my complex password and flawlessly execute an automated encrypted file transfer directly to Hayes in Atlanta. I successfully release the ruthless legal hounds upon their entire operation. The inescapable trap is completely set and the massive net is permanently cast over their heads. My physical safety is secured by the 3 red envelopes resting silently against my chest. I have done absolutely everything necessary to dismantle their destructive criminal fraud. I slowly lock my phone screen and slide the sleek device back into my dark tailored pocket. I simply wait for the loud reception music to finally start playing now. The lively chatter of the affluent crowd suddenly halts as the sharp clinking of a silver spoon against crystal cuts through the warm, coastal air. Harper stands perfectly positioned at the center of the lavishly decorated outdoor stage. She commands the immediate attention of the 300 wealthy guests with an expertly manufactured display of absolute grace. She holds her expensive champagne flute high above her head and projects a beaming smile across the manicured lawn. Her posture exudes total victory. She leans into the microphone and greets the quieted audience with a sickly sweet voice designed entirely for public consumption. She expertly plays the role of the devoted bride uniting 2 magnificent families. She pauses for dramatic effect before shifting her focus toward the very back row where I sit hidden among the floral arrangements. She loudly announces that her absolutely beloved new family patriarch has prepared an incredibly special surprise for the newlyweds to celebrate this momentous occasion. She deliberately uses the word patriarch to project an illusion of deep familial warmth and mutual respect to her wealthy peers. She graciously waves her hand toward the back of the venue, urging me to step out from the shadows and join them under the bright reception lights. She expects a broken, defeated man to shuffle obediently forward and surrender his entire legacy. She assumes her aggressive parking lot intimidation successfully shattered my resolve. She is completely unaware that she has just handed a live microphone directly to me tonight. Before I even stand up from my secluded wooden chair, a young catering assistant marches briskly onto the elevated platform carrying a highly polished silver tray securely in his hands. The gleaming metal surface is meticulously lined with deep crimson velvet specifically designed to visually highlight the legal documents resting on top. The assistant carefully displays the heavy stack of official property deed transfer papers alongside an incredibly expensive gold fountain pen. The entire theatrical presentation is orchestrated to make my impending financial surrender look like an act of extreme generational generosity. The 300 affluent guests immediately burst into a chorus of enthusiastic applause, almost entirely unaware of the massive criminal extortion occurring right in front of their wealthy faces. They clap loudly for a beautifully constructed lie, fully believing they are witnessing a heartwarming display of absolute paternal devotion. Anthony stands nervously beside his radiant bride, rubbing his sweaty palms together in deep, anxious anticipation. He stares intensely at the silver tray, viewing those unsigned papers as his sole remaining lifeline today. I shift my gaze entirely away from the clapping crowd and look directly toward the distant perimeter of the manicured lawn. The 2 violent syndicate enforcers immediately react to the appearance of the official property deed. They simultaneously push themselves off the white stone pillar and step forward out of the coastal shadows into the fading afternoon sunlight. They aggressively cross their heavily muscled arms over their cheap dark suits, physically claiming their territory at the very edge of the lavish celebration. Their cold, predatory eyes lock onto the silver tray with intense, terrifying focus. They are no longer casually observing the luxurious wedding reception from a polite distance. They are actively waiting for their $2 million collateral to be fully secured and legally finalized. Their menacing posture sends a very clear physical warning directly to my terrified son. If the golden fountain pen does not touch that specific piece of paper within the next 5 minutes, they will completely destroy this entire venue and brutally collect their massive illicit debt in human blood tonight. I slowly push myself up from the wooden folding chair and begin walking down the central aisle toward the brightly illuminated stage. I no longer hunch my shoulders forward in a simulated display of manufactured frailty. I straighten my spine completely, pulling my chest back and walking with the absolute unyielding command of a man who fully controls the destiny of everyone in this venue. The affluent guests watch my deliberate, confident strides with growing confusion. I ascend the wooden stairs, ignoring Harper's sickly sweet smile entirely. She extends her manicured hand toward the silver tray, expecting me to obediently pick up the expensive gold fountain pen and sign away my grandfather's hard-earned legacy. I bypass the velvet-lined tray completely, leaving the legal documents untouched on the polished metal surface. I reach out and firmly take the live microphone directly from her trembling hands. The entire coastal venue falls into a deep, terrified silence as the sheer intensity of my sudden physical transformation becomes undeniable. I turn my back on the greedy bride and lock my eyes directly onto my terrified son. Anthony shrinks backward, gripping the altar tightly as the blood drains rapidly from his face. He finally realizes the massive trap has fundamentally shifted. I raise the microphone to my lips and allow my deep, resonant voice to boom loudly across the manicured lawn. I address Anthony with crystal-clear articulation, ensuring the two syndicate enforcers in the very back row hear every single syllable perfectly. I state loudly that my ultimate wedding gift to him is far too massive and infinitely too complex to ever be contained on a single fragile piece of paper. I inform the stunned crowd that true generational wealth is not merely handed over blindly to thieves who resort to violent extortion and criminal intimidation. I loudly announce that I have officially protected our entire family legacy by permanently placing the lake cabin and every single liquid asset into an impenetrable, irrevocable charitable trust. The collective gasp from the wealthy audience echoes against the crashing ocean waves. Anthony's knees physically buckle under the crushing weight of my public declaration. He realizes instantly that the $2 million collateral he desperately promised to the underground loan sharks has officially evaporated into thin air. He is completely bankrupt, defenseless, and exposed. I stand tall and entirely victorious in front of the entire assembly. Harper's manufactured smile instantly shatters into a hideous mask of pure, unadulterated panic. She fully grasps the catastrophic implications of my public announcement. Her massive, elaborate wedding is now completely meaningless. The massive commercial debt she desperately attempted to erase will actively destroy her family tomorrow morning. She aggressively steps forward, attempting to physically snatch the microphone from my hands and immediately stop my humiliating public broadcast. She furiously wants to silence the brutal truth, but I effortlessly sidestep her desperate, lunging maneuver. I reach calmly inside my tailored tuxedo jacket and purposefully withdraw the very first sealed red envelope. I raise the bright crimson paper high above my head, ensuring every single guest witnesses the visual evidence of their profound deception. The entire coastal venue collectively holds its terrified breath, waiting for the definitive finishing blow. The gentle classical music completely stops, leaving only the sound of crashing ocean waves echoing across the manicured lawn. I stare directly down at Harper, watching her absolute arrogance rapidly dissolve into pathetic, whimpering fear. The elegant trap she built to destroy me has become her permanent prison. I slowly tear the heavy seal open, exposing the highly volatile secrets hidden within tonight. I step cleanly past Harper, completely ignoring her frantic, desperate attempts to physically block my path. Her manicured hands claw uselessly at the crisp fabric of my tuxedo sleeve as I move with unwavering purpose toward the edge of the elevated platform. I look directly down at her pompous father, who still stands near the front row with a deeply confused, arrogant smirk plastered across his flushed face. He expects me to hand him a massive ceremonial check or a highly lucrative property deed. He believes this vibrant crimson envelope holds the absolute financial salvation of his entire crumbling empire. I lean forward and aggressively thrust the heavy paper directly into his greedy, waiting hands. I lock my eyes onto his and issue a single unbreakable command. I order him to open the envelope immediately and read the contents aloud to the entire affluent assembly. His arrogant smirk falters for a fraction of a second as he registers the absolute coldness in my voice. He looks nervously at his daughter, seeking some form of silent reassurance, but Harper is entirely frozen in a state of pure, unadulterated panic. The wealthy guests seated in the front rows lean forward in their white wooden chairs, their eyes darting rapidly between the two of us. The coastal breeze feels incredibly thick and suffocating. The arrogant patriarch looks back down at the bright red envelope resting heavily in his palms, entirely unaware that he is holding the primary instrument of his own total destruction. The pompous man impatiently rips the sealed flap open with a harsh tearing sound that echoes through the sudden suffocating silence of the lavish reception. His greedy fingers delve inside, fully expecting to produce a certified check containing millions of dollars or a signed property deed validating their elaborate theft. Instead, his confident expression completely evaporates the absolute second his eyes lock onto the thick stack of legal documents. He is not holding a generous financial gift. He is staring directly at the comprehensive official bankruptcy filings for his supposedly booming commercial real estate business. The meticulously documented pages expose decades of toxic leverage, unpaid predatory loans, and imminent corporate collapse. But the devastating revelations do not end with his own financial ruin. Placed prominently beneath the bankruptcy certificates is a separate, highly detailed forensic accounting dossier completely detailing his family's aggressive criminal activity. The undeniable evidence clearly demonstrates how they systematically used my son Anthony's identity to fraudulently open massive corporate credit lines. The precise paper trail explicitly proves they intentionally siphoned hundreds of thousands of dollars to illegally fund this very wedding extravaganza. Every single designer dress, every imported white rose, and every crystal champagne flute was purchased using stolen capital secured under a forged signature. These devastating documents vividly display their undeniable guilt. The arrogant father turns a sickly ashen gray as the sheer magnitude of his absolute exposure completely registers in his mind. He physically begins to tremble. His knees buckle slightly under the crushing weight of the undeniable truth. His manicured fingers instantly lose their grip, and the heavy stack of devastating legal papers violently spills from his hands. The stark white pages flutter chaotically through the coastal breeze, scattering directly across the polished wooden dance floor in front of 300 affluent guests. His carefully constructed illusion of supreme wealth and untouchable power is instantly shattered into a million worthless fragments. He staggers backward, desperately gasping for air, unable to articulate a single coherent word of defense against the absolute destruction of his entire fraudulent existence tonight in front of his horrified social peers. I raise the cold metal microphone directly to my lips and allow my voice to boom mercilessly over the massive concert speakers surrounding the opulent reception. The tremendous volume slices aggressively through the stunned silence, completely commanding the absolute attention of every single person present. I firmly announce to the 300 horrified guests that the supposedly generous in-laws hosting this magnificent event are entirely bankrupt and drowning in over $2 million of catastrophic commercial debt. I explicitly reveal that their incredibly lavish display of wealth is an elaborate, heavily fabricated illusion built entirely upon stolen credit and malicious identity theft. A collective, deafening gasp forcefully erupts from the affluent crowd as the brutal reality of my words shatters their polite social facade. I continue my relentless public execution, systematically dismantling Harper's arrogant family piece by piece. I clearly inform the deeply panicked audience that this beautiful coastal wedding was not financed by successful real estate investments or vast generational fortunes. I publicly state that every single expensive detail was desperately funded by incredibly violent underground loan sharks who are actively demanding immediate repayment. My booming words instantly transform the elegant celebration into a highly volatile crime scene. Chaos quickly begins to ripple outward through the pristine white folding chairs. Wealthy socialites immediately whip out their expensive smartphones, eagerly hitting record to capture the unprecedented unfolding disaster in high-definition video. The gentle hum of polite conversation is completely replaced by the chaotic sounds of frantic whispering and aggressive digital documentation. I watch Anthony shrink helplessly against the towering floral archway, his face completely pale as his fraudulent kingdom burns rapidly to the ground. Harper stares at me with wild, unhinged eyes, finally understanding the sheer magnitude of her monumental miscalculation. She assumed I was a weak, easily manipulated target, entirely ignoring the undeniable strength required to build a lasting legacy from absolutely nothing. I relentlessly expose their toxic greed, ensuring that their elite social standing is permanently eradicated within their own affluent circles. The guests are no longer respectfully celebrating a beautiful marital union. They are actively consuming a highly spectacular, devastating public ruin. I stand perfectly still on the elevated stage, a solitary figure delivering absolute justice. I have successfully weaponized the truth against their countless lies, leaving them completely naked and entirely defenseless before the harsh judgment of the very society they desperately sought to impress. Harper violently lunges forward across the wooden stage, her manicured fingers clawing desperately for the heavy metal microphone. Her perfect bridal facade completely crumbles into raw animalistic fury. She screams frantically at the frozen musicians, aggressively demanding they play the wedding music loudly to instantly drown out my devastating revelations. Her terrified, shrill voice cracks painfully over the massive speakers before I firmly yank the microphone entirely out of her desperate reach. Anthony realizes the ultimate catastrophe has officially struck. He abandons his paralyzed new wife and physically charges the elevated platform, his eyes locked intensely on my dark tuxedo coat. He desperately intends to forcefully grab the remaining red envelopes before I can expose any more lethal family secrets to the horrified public. His movements are sloppy and entirely driven by blind, overwhelming panic. Simultaneously, the two heavily muscled syndicate enforcers completely drop their polite disguises. They aggressively shove their way through the chaotic crowd of screaming, panicked socialites. They begin moving incredibly fast toward the front table, their dark jackets swinging open to reveal heavy, lethal firearms. The violent criminals have officially initiated their brutal collection process, transforming this extravagant celebration into a deadly, inescapable battlefield immediately today. Total chaos erupts across the manicured coastal lawn as the initial shockwave of my public declaration shatters the opulent reception. Affluent guests scramble backward over white wooden chairs, screaming and frantically pointing recording smartphones toward the stage. Elegant crystal champagne flutes shatter against the polished dance floor, spilling expensive vintage alcohol over imported silk shoes. Through this surging tide of absolute panic, Anthony charges the elevated platform like a cornered, desperate animal. His face is flushed with a terrifying mixture of immense rage and undeniable terror as he aggressively lunges toward my tailored tuxedo. He desperately reaches out with trembling hands to physically silence my broadcast and seize the remaining damning evidence. I stand completely unshaken and resolute amidst the swirling hurricane of wealthy socialites and furious family members. My structural engineering background has trained me to remain perfectly calm when surrounding frameworks catastrophically fail. As my son closes the final distance and raises his hand to grab the lapel of my coat, I pivot my stance with calculated precision. I intercept his aggressive physical advance flawlessly. I reach directly into my inner breast pocket and extract the second sealed red envelope. Before Anthony can utter a single frantic command or physically assault me, I step directly into his personal space. I lift my arm and forcefully shove the thick crimson paper firmly flat against his rapidly heaving chest. The physical impact stops his forward momentum, instantly forcing him to confront the absolute reality of his total financial annihilation tonight. Anthony clumsily rips the heavy red seal open, his terrified eyes scanning the stark white documents contained inside. The envelope delivers the uncompromising final consequence of his massive corporate fraud. It contains the immediate official bank foreclosure notices for his sprawling suburban home and the aggressive repossession orders for his entire fleet of luxury cars. The ruthless commercial banks have explicitly terminated his massive credit lines due to the undeniable proof of his forged financial signatures. He reads the irrefutable evidence of his impending bankruptcy and his hands begin shaking uncontrollably, entirely unable to grasp the magnitude of his absolute ruin. His fraudulent tech empire has officially evaporated, leaving him utterly destitute in front of his wealthy peers. Simultaneously, my encrypted digital transfer to Hayes successfully triggers the secondary counterattack established by Logan. The brilliant private investigator flawlessly hacks directly into the sophisticated wireless audio equipment. The soft background music playing across the massive reception speakers abruptly cuts out, replaced by a sharp, piercing burst of electronic static. Suddenly, Harper's distinct shrill voice furiously blasts through the enormous amplifiers, echoing loudly across the terrified wedding venue. The pristine digital recording captured from my hidden breast pocket explicitly broadcasts her vile, aggressive gloating from the Italian restaurant. Her booming, unhinged voice loudly details her meticulous, horrific plan to forcefully lock me inside a remote psychiatric asylum to completely steal my family legacy. She openly mocks my perceived weakness and proudly brags about orchestrating the illegal theft of Diana's original will from my personal safe. The pristine audio quality leaves absolutely no room for denial or polite misinterpretation. 300 affluent guests stand entirely paralyzed, listening to the blushing bride explicitly expose her own ruthless criminal conspiracy to the entire world. Harper covers her ears in absolute screaming panic as her carefully constructed societal facade is brutally annihilated by her own malicious words. The devastating recording continuously loops, filling the crisp coastal air with the undeniable sound of her monstrous entitlement. Anthony drops the foreclosure papers onto the floor, staring completely hollowed out as his entire fraudulent existence completely incinerates around him. The highly shocking digital recording finally stops completely, leaving an incredibly heavy, suffocating silence hanging directly over the entire luxurious coastal reception. I stand firmly at the front of the elevated wooden stage, completely commanding the absolute attention of the 300 thoroughly horrified guests. The expensive silver tray holding the useless property deed rests entirely forgotten on the polished table. I grip the cold metal microphone tightly and prepare to deliver the absolute devastating truth. I look directly into my son's deeply panicked eyes and speak with a voice completely devoid of any remaining paternal sympathy. I loudly announce to the paralyzed crowd that the highly contested 10 acres of prime waterfront real estate no longer belongs to me, and it certainly will never belong to him. I explicitly and loudly reveal that exactly 24 hours ago, I executed an irrevocable, dual-layered trust mechanism, permanently transferring the entire lake cabin property directly to an anonymous wildlife conservation charity. The pristine acreage is now legally protected forever from any future corporate resort development. I watch the precise moment Anthony fully comprehends the sheer magnitude of his total failure. The incredibly massive financial flip he meticulously planned to save his entire life has instantly evaporated into absolutely nothing. I stare fiercely at him and loudly declare that his utterly desperate forged medical power of attorney is now entirely and irrevocably worthless. The incredibly violent underground crime syndicate cannot seize a single inch of the protected sanctuary land. He deliberately gambled his very survival on a piece of paper that currently holds absolutely zero financial value. I clearly explain the brutal mechanics of his colossal miscalculation to the wealthy audience, leaving absolutely no room for any polite societal misinterpretation. I systematically expose how his toxic arrogance and profound technological incompetence blinded him to the incredibly sophisticated legal traps his own mother proactively established to defend our legacy. His beautiful, expensive wedding suit cannot hide the pathetic reality that he has completely bankrupted his own future through sheer, unadulterated greed. I ensure my booming voice carries directly to the absolute back row of the stunned venue. I want the dangerous loan shark enforcers to perfectly understand that my son has actively defrauded their violent organization. I stand completely victorious upon the massive stage, watching the absolute destruction of his fraudulent empire while delivering the ultimate uncompromising penalty for his horrific family betrayal today. The ruthless lead syndicate enforcer standing near the outer perimeter hears my uncompromising public declaration perfectly clearly over the heavy concert speakers. His very cold, highly calculating expression instantly hardens into a mask of pure lethal fury. He rapidly and expertly processes the devastating financial reality of the situation within a single terrifying second. He realizes with absolute certainty that the promised multi-million-dollar land collateral has just permanently evaporated into thin air. My son's massive $2 million underground debt is now completely unsecured, representing a monumental loss for their violent criminal organization. The enormous, dangerous man does not hesitate or attempt to quietly negotiate a peaceful resolution. He abruptly lunges forward with terrifying speed, his massive hands gripping the edge of the nearest catering station. He violently flips the heavy, lavishly decorated banquet table completely upside down. Expensive crystal glasses, towering floral centerpieces, and silver serving trays launch explosively through the humid coastal air, crashing brutally onto the pristine white wooden dance floor. The deafening sound of shattering glass and snapping wood officially triggers mass hysteria across the luxurious venue. The violent enforcer aggressively reaches beneath his dark jacket, completely abandoning his polite corporate disguise to collect his bloody payment today. Total panic instantly consumes the luxurious coastal reception as the deafening sound of shattering crystal triggers a massive stampede. 300 affluent guests abandon their expensive champagne flutes and frantically run for the nearest exit gates. The manicured lawn is completely trampled under fleeing silk shoes. The two heavily muscled syndicate enforcers surge forward through the screaming crowd with terrifying speed. They entirely ignore the fleeing socialites and focus their violent rage exclusively on my terrified son. The lead enforcer viciously grabs Anthony by the collar of his expensive tailored tuxedo. He lifts the cowardly groom completely off his feet and brutally slams him backward into a towering swan ice sculpture. The freezing structure cracks loudly under the violent impact. Shards of frozen water shower down upon Anthony as he desperately gasps for air. He wildly flails his arms, attempting to break the suffocating physical grip, but the massive criminal simply tightens his hold. Meanwhile, Harper's boastful parents recognize the imminent danger and instantly prioritize their own survival over family loyalty. The arrogant patriarch entirely forgets his previous claims of immense wealth and profound generosity. He violently pushes past several fleeing guests, shoving them into the decorative rose bushes. He sprints aggressively toward the valet parking area, dragging his panicked wife behind him. They cowardly abandon their screaming daughter, entirely leaving Harper completely alone on the elevated stage to face the catastrophic consequences of their shared fraudulent actions. The illusion of their elite dominance is completely obliterated entirely here today. Harper stands on the wooden stage and screams like a terrifying banshee. Her pristine designer gown is splattered with spilled champagne and her perfect bridal hair is completely ruined. She realizes her entire wealthy existence is permanently destroyed. She viciously turns her unhinged fury directly toward her desperate new husband. She charges forward and brutally slaps Anthony across the face with tremendous physical force. The sharp cracking sound temporarily cuts through the chaotic noise of the fleeing crowd. She aggressively blames him for utterly failing to control his father's immense assets and securing their fraudulent financial future. The carefully manufactured illusion of their profound romantic love dissolves instantly into vicious, highly selfish hatred right before my eyes. She curses his fundamental incompetence and publicly degrades his entire character. Anthony stumbles backward under the intense physical and emotional assault. The syndicate enforcer ruthlessly drops his suffocating grip, allowing the groom to violently collapse backward off the elevated stage. Anthony falls heavily into the muddy coastal dirt, completely ruining his expensive tailored tuxedo jacket. He grovels pathetically on the ruined grass, unable to formulate a single coherent defense against his furious bride or the looming criminals. I watch their toxic relationship completely disintegrate into pure raw venom. The beautiful archway of imported white roses collapses behind them, framing their pathetic downfall perfectly. Every single lie they aggressively constructed has finally imploded, leaving them entirely bankrupt and exposed. The wealthy socialites continue sprinting toward the safety of their expensive vehicles, completely abandoning the ruined couple. Anthony clutches his burning cheek and stares blankly at the muddy ground, completely broken and entirely defeated. Harper continues screaming obscenities into the humid coastal air, blaming everyone except her own malicious greed. The absolute devastation is completely comprehensive and entirely deserved. Their fraudulent empire is entirely reduced to broken crystal and muddy designer fabric. I remain perfectly calm, simply watching the inescapable consequences of their horrific betrayal unfold with mathematical precision. The violent syndicate enforcers silently surround the weeping groom, entirely blocking any possible avenue of escape. The absolute final judgment has officially arrived completely here today. I stand completely motionless on the elevated wooden platform, watching the magnificent destruction unfold, utterly impassively. The chaotic, swirling scene of fleeing wealthy guests and violent underground criminals feels remarkably distant to me now. My mind briefly detaches from the deafening noise of the ruined wedding reception. A vivid, poignant memory suddenly surfaces, pushing through the current adrenaline and raw tension. I am instantly transported back to a quiet, sterile hospital room, softly illuminated by a fading afternoon sun. The gentle, rhythmic beeping of cardiac monitors replaces the harsh screaming of the panicked coastal crowd. I clearly see my beloved late wife Diana resting fragilely against the starched white pillows. Her physical body was incredibly weak from the relentless illness, but her brilliant spirit remained absolutely unbreakable until the very end. She reached out with her trembling, slender fingers and grasped my large, calloused hand with surprising, ferocious strength. Her beautiful, deep brown eyes locked intensely onto mine, piercing through my immense, overwhelming sorrow. She spoke with a quiet, unwavering clarity that permanently etched her final words directly into my very soul. She firmly commanded me never to let someone else's toxic, malicious greed forcefully turn me into a helpless, pathetic victim. She demanded that I fiercely protect our shared legacy, our precious dignity, and the incredibly hard work we meticulously built together over 4 long decades. She accurately predicted that our monumental success would inevitably attract ruthless, opportunistic scavengers who would happily exploit our kindness for their own massive, unearned financial gain. She forced me to swear a solemn, holy oath that I would violently defend our family foundation against absolutely any vicious external or internal threats. I promised her I would never surrender. Today, standing amidst the absolute shattered remains of my son's fraudulent empire, I finally feel a profound, immense sense of complete closure. I have successfully honored her powerful final dying wish with absolute, total, uncompromising precision. I actively refused to play the tragic role of the betrayed, vulnerable old man. I effectively weaponized the brutal truth to completely obliterate their incredibly complex web of pathetic criminal lies. I protected our sacred legacy from total annihilation. I slowly bring my focus back to the present reality, returning to the chaotic, muddy lawn. I have absolutely nothing left to prove to anyone here today. The relentless, brutal war is finally over completely, and I am entirely free. The distinct, piercing wail of approaching police sirens suddenly echoes loudly through the warm coastal distance. The sharp, alternating tones rapidly grow louder, actively cutting through the hysterical screaming of the remaining trapped socialites. Lawyer Hayes and Logan, my brilliant private investigator, had preemptively called the federal authorities exactly 30 minutes ago. They provided the police with undeniable, comprehensive evidence regarding the massive corporate financial fraud and the confirmed aggressive presence of the underground crime syndicate. Dozens of heavily armed tactical officers are currently rushing toward this exact coastal location to rapidly arrest everyone involved in this elaborate, destructive conspiracy. I slowly step down from the elevated wooden stage, entirely untouched by the violent chaos swirling aggressively around my black shoes. I calmly reach up and meticulously straighten my crisp silk tie with perfectly unhurried precision. I do not look back at Anthony sobbing weakly in the wet mud, or Harper screaming hysterically near the ruined floral archway. I simply turn my shoulders and walk steadily away from the shattered spectacle. I stride calmly and victoriously out the massive iron front gates, leaving the flaming wreckage of their deceit entirely behind me forever to begin my brand new life today. The early morning sun breaks over the eastern horizon, casting long golden rays across the dense pine trees surrounding my secluded lake cabin. I sit quietly in my worn wooden rocking chair on the back porch, holding a steaming mug of strong black coffee. The dark liquid warms my hands against the brisk morning chill. I look out over the perfectly still water. The glassy surface reflects the bright, cloudless sky with absolute clarity, offering a profound, stark contrast to the violent, screaming madness of the previous night. The chaotic echoes of shattering crystal, wailing police sirens, and desperate, aggressive threats have been entirely replaced by the gentle chirping of crickets and the soft rustling of pine needles in the breeze. I breathe in the crisp, clean air, feeling an immense physical and emotional weight finally lifted from my tired shoulders. The relentless burden of anticipating their malicious betrayal is permanently gone. I successfully protected my wife's sacred legacy, executing her final dying wish with absolute flawless precision. I did not allow their toxic greed to strip me of my dignity or my hard-earned sanctuary. The wildlife conservation charity now securely holds the title to this beautiful land, ensuring no corrupt developer will ever pour concrete over these pristine shores. I take a slow, deliberate sip of the bitter coffee, letting the familiar taste ground me in this peaceful new reality. The devastating war I waged against my own family is completely over, leaving behind a quiet, resolute victory. The tranquil morning silence is abruptly shattered by the harsh, grinding crunch of tires tearing up my long gravel driveway. A severely battered, cheap rental car violently jerks to a halt near the edge of the property, kicking up a thick cloud of gray dust. The damaged driver's side door creaks open loudly, and Anthony slowly steps out into the blinding, bright sunlight. His physical appearance is an absolute horrifying disaster. His ruined, muddy tuxedo trousers hang loosely around his waist, heavily stained from crawling through the wet grass, escaping the extremely violent syndicate enforcers. A massive, purple, swelling black eye completely obscures the entire left side of his deeply bruised face. His bottom lip is brutally split open, crusted with dried blood that he nervously picks at with desperately trembling fingers. He limps awkwardly toward my porch, looking like a thoroughly beaten survivor of a deeply catastrophic war. He weakly approaches the wooden stairs and immediately blurts out the catastrophic aftermath of the ruined reception. He frantically explains that the federal authorities swooped in and instantly froze every single one of his fraudulent bank accounts. He possesses absolutely zero financial resources to hire even a basic defense attorney to avoid prison. The ultimate humiliating irony quickly follows his confession. He explicitly reveals that the highly anticipated marriage certificate was never officially filed with the state courthouse. Harper ruthlessly abandoned their sinking ship the absolute second the federal agents swarmed the coastal venue. She selfishly packed her incredibly expensive designer jewelry, gathered her remaining stolen cash, and completely vanished into the dark night hours before dawn ever broke. She permanently left him entirely alone to face the brutal legal and physical consequences of their shared criminal conspiracy. The immense weight of his total, inescapable ruin finally crushes his remaining arrogant pride entirely today. Anthony violently collapses onto the bottom step of my wooden porch, burying his bruised face deep into his dirty hands. He begins weeping loudly and uncontrollably, his shoulders heaving violently under the morning sun as he experiences the absolute devastation of losing everything he had fraudulently built. Between pathetic, gasping sobs, Anthony desperately begs me for an immediate, highly comprehensive financial rescue. He lifts his severely bruised face, his bloodshot eyes pleading frantically for a fatherly bailout that he absolutely does not ever deserve. He practically crawls up the wooden stairs, shamelessly grabbing the cuff of my dark trousers to physically anchor himself. He wildly implores me to completely liquidate my personal life savings and rapidly hire a team of elite corporate defense attorneys to magically keep him out of a maximum security federal prison for his massive, undisputed bank fraud. His voice is incredibly shrill, completely stripped of the pompous arrogance he aggressively flaunted under the floral wedding archway just yesterday. In a truly disgusting display of ultimate cowardice, he instantly shifts absolutely every single ounce of the heavy blame directly onto Harper. He loudly claims that her highly manipulative family entirely brainwashed him into signing those forged loan documents against his own free will. He violently paints himself as an innocent, naive victim who was deeply terrified into blind compliance by her father's intimidating social influence and their relentless pursuit of vast, unearned wealth. He insists that he never actually wanted to steal the family lake cabin, claiming he was forcefully backed into a dangerous corner by the incredibly violent syndicate enforcers Harper secretly introduced to their business. He spins a pathetic, highly elaborate narrative of absolute victimhood, desperately rewriting the entire treacherous history to entirely absolve himself of any actual personal responsibility. He swears profusely that he loves me passionately, promising to completely reform his entire life and finally become the loyal, dedicated son I always wanted if I simply write a massive check to save him from severe federal indictment today. He babbles incoherently about our shared family blood, shamelessly weaponizing our deep biological connection to emotionally extort a miraculous pardon. Every single tear streaming down his muddy cheeks is a highly calculated, desperate attempt to trigger my paternal mercy. He incorrectly assumes that beneath the cold, unyielding exterior I displayed at the reception, the soft, forgiving father he mercilessly exploited still blindly exists. He foolishly expects me to absorb the catastrophic damage of his extremely reckless criminal greed precisely because I have always protected him from his own profound failures. He continues his pathetic, groveling monologue, entirely failing to comprehend the permanent paradigm shift that has definitively occurred between us this morning. I slowly raise the warm ceramic mug and take another long, deliberate sip of my strong black coffee, letting the bitter taste settle my racing thoughts. I look down at my kneeling son with absolute piercing clarity. The blinding veil of unconditional parental affection has been entirely burned away by his vicious actions. Staring at his shaking frame, I finally understand the cold, undeniable truth of his emotional display. I realize instantly that Anthony is not crying out of any genuine moral remorse for the horrific pain he intentionally inflicted upon me. He sheds no tears for the profound betrayal of his mother's dying memory or the deliberate destruction of our shared family trust. He is only crying because he is entirely cornered, completely bankrupt, and facing severe federal incarceration. This dramatic weeping plea for forgiveness is absolutely not a sincere apology. It is simply just another highly calculated, desperate layer of his endless psychological manipulation. He now firmly views my mercy as a financial tool to escape his own self-inflicted nightmare. I lower my coffee mug and look out over the peaceful, undisturbed lake, finally accepting that the greedy man groveling on my porch is completely unrecognizable to me today. The heavy crunch of thick tires violently crushing loose gravel shatters the tense morning quiet. A massive armored black SUV rolls aggressively onto the secluded property and parks directly behind Anthony's battered rental car. The heavy driver door swings open with a sharp mechanical thud. Lawyer Hayes steps smoothly out into the bright coastal sunlight. He wears an immaculate charcoal suit that perfectly matches his entirely professional and deeply uncompromising demeanor. He holds a massive, battered leather briefcase tightly in his right hand. The thick leather is worn from decades of ruthless corporate litigation and high-stakes legal warfare. Hayes evaluates the pathetic scene on the wooden porch with cold, analytical precision. He sees Anthony groveling pathetically in the dirty gravel with a swollen, bruised face and completely ruined clothes. Anthony desperately reaches his shaking hands out toward the approaching attorney, hoping for some miraculous legal salvation. Hayes does not offer a single ounce of human sympathy or basic professional courtesy. He completely ignores the weeping, broken man, entirely sidestepping his desperate, grasping fingers as if stepping over a piece of decaying roadkill. He ascends the wooden steps with heavy, deliberate strides and positions himself firmly right beside my rocking chair. He stands tall like a silent, impenetrable fortress, actively shielding me from my son's toxic manipulation. He places the heavy leather briefcase squarely onto the small wooden table resting between us. The sharp click of the brass locks loudly confirms the final phase of my counterattack has arrived today. Hayes snaps the twin brass catches open with a harsh metallic clack. He methodically lifts the thick leather flap and reaches inside the dark interior to produce a pristine stack of highly sensitive legal documents. He looks down at Anthony and begins to speak with the absolute chilling precision of a ruthless corporate executioner. He smoothly bypasses any polite introductory remarks and brutally informs the weeping man about my late wife and her absolute crowning achievement. He explains that before she peacefully passed away, she meticulously engineered a flawless, impenetrable legal defense mechanism seamlessly embedded deep within our family foundation. She brilliantly designed an aggressive, incredibly punitive protocol legally designated as the ironclad poison pill clause. This magnificent masterpiece of estate law was explicitly crafted to permanently annihilate any internal familial threats. Hayes reads the specific contractual language aloud, ensuring every single devastating syllable lands squarely upon his extremely bruised ears. The uncompromising clause dictates that any named biological heir who maliciously attempts to execute financial fraud, actively engages in any form of digital or physical forgery, or directly threatens the mental or physical medical health of the primary trustee will be absolutely, immediately, and completely stripped of their entire future inheritance. The punitive activation is entirely automatic, triggering instantaneously the exact moment any hostile adversarial action is thoroughly documented and legally verified. The staggering, remarkably efficient clause completely bypasses any standard probate mediation, thereby absolutely blocking any realistic possibility of prolonged future legal appeals or extremely desperate courtroom negotiations. Diana accurately predicted that vast accumulated wealth could tragically poison even our own flesh and blood. She possessed the profound, incredible foresight to build an aggressive financial trapdoor ready to swallow any treacherous heir whole. The brilliant mechanism requires no extended courtroom battle to fully execute its devastating penalty. It operates with a cold mathematical ruthlessness designed exclusively to punish ungrateful entitlement and aggressively eradicate severe malicious greed. Hayes coldly explains that the massive penalty is entirely irreversible and absolute, permanently locking the offending individual out of the beautiful family legacy forever without any lingering hope of personal redemption today. Hayes formally declares that every single malicious action committed over the past month has been thoroughly documented and meticulously verified by private investigators. He explicitly states that the forged signature utilized to illegally secure the massive corporate loan instantly activated the punitive measures built directly into the impenetrable trust document. Furthermore, he reveals that the cowardly attempt to forcefully authorize a fraudulent psychiatric hold completely solidified the absolute irreversible execution of this specific defensive protocol. The incredibly foolish combination of financial theft and severe physical threats triggered the defensive clause instantly, without any possibility of a temporary delay or compassionate reversal. My entire vast estate is now permanently, completely, and legally shielded from any future predatory attacks forever. Hayes looks at the broken man crying in the dusty gravel and brutally delivers the final, devastating, crushing blow. He announces that my complete financial portfolio has been irrevocably restructured to entirely exclude my biological son from ever accessing a single isolated penny. Every single valuable property, every lucrative investment account, and every hidden offshore asset has been legally redirected toward a totally different future destination. Hayes loudly clarifies that even upon the exact moment of my natural physical death, absolutely nothing will be quietly transferred back into the family bloodline. Instead, the entirety of the massive accumulated fortune will automatically fund a highly prestigious minority engineering scholarship designed specifically to support brilliant, underprivileged students. The immense wealth will successfully educate countless future innovators entirely, completely, and permanently, bypassing the greedy, ungrateful son who maliciously attempted to steal it. Anthony listens to this incredibly precise legal explanation, and his entire physical body begins to forcefully shake with pure, unadulterated terror. He realizes that he has successfully destroyed his own life entirely through his extreme toxic arrogance and blinding greed. He has traded an absolutely guaranteed life of supreme, effortless luxury for immediate catastrophic bankruptcy and impending federal incarceration. The incredible magnitude of his monumental failure is absolutely undeniable and deeply profound. He will genuinely never inherit the beautiful lake cabin, the incredibly lucrative commercial properties, or the massive liquid cash reserves. This magnificent collection of family wealth will exclusively benefit those who actually deserve a genuine opportunity to succeed. He has been fully and entirely permanently erased from the complete generational legacy forever. The ungrateful son gets absolutely nothing forever and will permanently remain entirely destitute while facing severe legal consequences today. The harsh finality of the legal explanation definitively breaks Anthony's fragile psychological state. He snaps violently. The pathetic sorrow masking his features instantly turns into a terrifying, venomous rage. His bruised face twists into a hideous snarl as he violently scrambles to his feet, launching himself toward the elevated porch. He viciously screams horrific insults and vile, aggressive curses directly at me, wildly thrashing his arms through the crisp morning air. He completely abandons his pathetic victim routine, fully embracing the dark, toxic monster he has truly become. I simply raise my right hand and deliver a silent, subtle physical signal. The heavy wooden front door of the rustic cabin swings open immediately. Logan steps smoothly out into the bright sunshine, entirely prepared for this exact violent escalation. The massive, highly trained private investigator effortlessly intercepts my screaming son, entirely blocking his aggressive forward momentum. Logan forcefully grabs Anthony by his ruined tuxedo collar and physically escorts the thrashing, unhinged man completely off the private property. He drags the furious bankrupt criminal forcefully down the long gravel driveway. The ultimate profound severance between father and son is now completely final, entirely irreversible, and totally absolute here forever starting from today. Exactly 3 weeks later, the chaotic violence of the coastal wedding feels like a distant memory. I currently sit in a stark gray interrogation room deep inside the federal courthouse. The walls are completely bare and painted a dull, oppressive concrete shade. A heavy steel door seals us inside the highly secure facility. The fluorescent lights overhead hum with a steady, relentless rhythm, casting harsh shadows across the scratched metal table. I remain perfectly calm and entirely composed. Directly across from me sits a seasoned financial crimes detective. He is a meticulous veteran investigator wearing a wrinkled suit and a deeply exhausted expression. He slowly opens a thick manila folder filled with chaotic preliminary reports gathered from the shattered remains of the wedding venue. He desperately needs concrete evidence to successfully prosecute the massive web of corporate fraud left behind in the violent wake of the syndicate confrontation. The detective leans forward, folding his hands together, and asks me directly for the absolute truth regarding my son and his criminal in-laws. I do not flinch or offer any defensive excuses for Anthony's monumental failures. I sip from a flimsy paper cup of bitter black coffee and prepare to officially execute the final legal phase of my defensive strategy. I have patiently waited for this specific moment. I am fully prepared to permanently dismantle their entire fraudulent empire using the exact legal system they arrogantly tried to weaponize against me. My profound patience is finally paying off completely today. I calmly reach inside my dark tailored jacket and produce a sleek silver external hard drive. I firmly slide the small metallic device across the scratched table directly into the detective's waiting hands. This compact drive contains the absolute entirety of Logan's meticulously compiled forensic investigation. It represents weeks of highly sophisticated digital surveillance and aggressive financial tracking perfectly packaged for immediate prosecution. I clearly explain that the drive holds high-definition scans of every single forged signature used to fraudulently secure their massive corporate loans. It explicitly details the precise digital timeline of the stolen will, proving unequivocally that Harper maliciously removed the original documents directly from my personal safe. The files provide undeniable comprehensive proof of the massive illegal credit card lines entirely opened under my stolen identity to selfishly fund their extravagant lifestyle. More importantly, the drive contains the definitive trail of highly illicit syndicate money, cleanly connecting the violent underground loan sharks directly to Harper's arrogant family and to my desperate son. The financial records meticulously outline exactly how Anthony willfully accepted incredibly dangerous criminal funds to artificially prop up his failing tech startup. Every single illicit bank transfer, every encrypted email, and every hidden corporate asset has been entirely exposed and permanently cataloged. The seasoned detective plugs the silver drive into his secure laptop, and his tired eyes immediately widen as the sheer magnitude of the undeniable criminal conspiracy rapidly floods his screen. He realizes he is looking at a guaranteed ironclad federal conviction perfectly handed to him on a silver platter. I watch him scroll through the devastating evidence, knowing that I have officially sealed their inescapable legal fate. They arrogantly believed they could seamlessly steal my legacy without facing any substantial consequences, but they vastly underestimated my absolute commitment to total retaliation. The staggering weight of their horrific crimes is now permanently locked into the strict federal justice system. I sit back in my rigid metal chair and observe the detective process, the incredibly detailed financial ruin of a deeply corrupt family. My structural engineering mind appreciates the flawless legal architecture perfectly today. Suddenly, the heavy steel door swings open and Harper's extremely high-priced corporate defense lawyer aggressively marches into the small interrogation room. He wears a custom Italian suit and projects an aura of extreme legal arrogance. He immediately slams his leather briefcase onto the metal table, attempting to forcefully halt the ongoing investigation. The flashy attorney loudly claims blatant legal entrapment, aggressively arguing that Logan's pristine audio recordings from the Italian restaurant are completely inadmissible in any formal federal court proceeding. He arrogantly asserts that Harper's constitutional rights were maliciously violated because the covert surveillance lacked official judicial authorization. His loud theatrical performance is designed entirely to physically intimidate the exhausted detective and quickly derail the impending criminal indictments. However, my brilliant lawyer Hayes instantly counters this pathetic legal maneuver. Hayes completely ignores the flashy attorney's aggressive posturing and strikes back lethally with absolute supreme judicial authority. He calmly invokes highly specific and exceptionally robust state elder financial abuse protections, explicitly overriding their desperate wiretapping complaints entirely. Hayes clearly explains that covert audio recordings are fully admissible when a vulnerable senior citizen actively fears for their immediate physical and financial safety. The arrogant defense lawyer scoffs dismissively, completely unaware of the devastating secondary evidence we have meticulously prepared. Hayes slowly reaches into his dark briefcase and produces a high-definition tablet perfectly angled for the detective to clearly view. He silently taps the screen to present the undeniable hidden camera footage captured directly from my own private study. The crystal-clear video prominently shows a furious, unhinged Harper violently smashing the priceless antique vase against the wall and explicitly threatening to brutally destroy my entire life. The footage perfectly captures her immense physical aggression and her incredibly specific threats of forceful psychiatric institutionalization. Her undeniable violence provides the absolute necessary legal foundation justifying my extreme covert surveillance measures. The detective watches the terrifying video with his completely widened eyes, thoroughly disgusted by her horrific behavior. The flashy corporate attorney instantly stops speaking, completely paralyzed by the overwhelming strength of our undeniable visual evidence. He stares blankly at the bright screen, realizing his entire aggressive entrapment defense has just completely and permanently crumbled entirely into absolutely worthless legal dust. The incredibly expensive lawyer slowly closes his briefcase in total defeat, perfectly understanding that Harper's incredibly arrogant actions have fully guaranteed her impending federal incarceration permanently right here starting early tomorrow morning. Official arrest warrants are immediately issued for Harper and both of her incredibly arrogant parents. The ruthless syndicate members are simultaneously indicted on severe racketeering charges thanks entirely to Logan's perfectly documented financial trail. The complete destruction of their toxic criminal network is an absolute undisputed success. However, the exhausted detective suddenly shifts his posture and drops a final extremely heavy manila file directly onto the scratched metal table. He looks at me with a deeply serious gaze and plainly states the harsh, inescapable legal reality. My son Anthony officially faces a strict mandatory minimum 5-year federal prison sentence for orchestrating the massive commercial bank fraud. The rigid justice system offers absolutely no leniency for his specific corporate crimes. I stare silently at the incredibly thick stack of damning evidence sitting before me. The detective quietly informs me that my formal victim impact statement will definitively determine if Anthony receives maximum penal leniency or the absolute harshest judicial punishment available. I must now strictly make a profound final choice regarding the ultimate fate of my treacherous blood. I slowly finish my cold black coffee and deeply prepare to sever our biological connection permanently right here today in this room. I walk slowly down the bleak corridor of the Federal Detention Center. The sterile white walls and harshly flickering fluorescent lights create an atmosphere completely devoid of human warmth. My leather shoes click rhythmically against the cold concrete floor, echoing loudly through the silent hallway. I am entirely focused on the profound gravity of this final confrontation. An armed guard unlocks a heavy steel door, allowing me entry into an isolated visitation room. I sit down quietly in a rigid metal chair directly facing a thick pane of reinforced glass. The heavy barrier physically separates the free world from the harsh reality of severe penal consequences. A loud metallic buzz signals the opening of the door on the opposite side of the partition. 2 stern corrections officers firmly escort my son into the small booth. Anthony is wearing a bright orange prison jumpsuit that hangs loosely on his significantly diminished frame. The stark, humiliating uniform completely replaces the expensive, tailored Italian suits he arrogantly flaunted just weeks ago. He moves with a slow, defeated shuffle, dragging his feet across the linoleum floor. The steel handcuffs binding his wrists clink sharply against the metal table as he clumsily sits down. He looks incredibly small and entirely isolated within the bleak institutional environment. I stare at him through the thick glass, feeling absolutely no pity. I only feel a deep, resolute clarity regarding the necessary, uncompromising justice currently unfolding before me right here today inside this one extremely grim federal prison facility. Anthony slowly raises his head and stares back at me through the thick, reinforced glass barrier. He looks entirely stripped of his former profound arrogance and toxic entitlement. The fake bravado that defined his entire fraudulent existence is completely gone forever. His deeply bruised face reflects the absolute crushing reality of his inescapable legal situation. He slowly reaches forward with his chained hands and picks up the heavy black receiver hanging on the metal wall. I pick up the matching phone on my side, holding the cold plastic firmly against my ear. A heavy static-filled silence stretches between us for a long, agonizing moment. Then, for the absolute first time in his entire adult life, my son utters a genuinely sincere and entirely uncalculated apology. His voice is incredibly weak and continuously shakes with raw, authentic emotion as he speaks directly into the receiver. He openly admits his massive, catastrophic failure without attempting to shift the blame onto Harper or her manipulative, wealthy family. He explicitly confesses that his own blinding greed completely destroyed his morality. He acknowledges the profound, immense pain he intentionally caused me and fully recognizes the disgusting disrespect he showed toward his mother and her lasting legacy. He does not ask for a sudden miraculous financial rescue today. He simply states that he finally understands the incredibly severe consequences of his monstrous actions. He completely owns his malicious deceit and fully accepts the total devastation of his fraudulent tech empire. He cries softly, while detailing how his extreme foolishness cost him everything valuable he ever possessed. He admits he traded genuine familial love for toxic superficial wealth and entirely lost his very soul during the process. He openly states that he deserves absolutely no mercy from me or the federal justice system. Listening to his completely broken confession, I finally hear the lost boy I raised speaking truthfully without any remaining layers of malicious deception. He speaks with absolute vulnerability, exposing his shattered spirit entirely. This profound confession marks the exact definitive end of his lifelong arrogant charade forever, right here within this dark room. I listen to his entire confession without interrupting, keeping my expression completely stoic. When he finally finishes, I speak firmly and clearly into the black receiver. I tell him absolutely directly that I flatly refuse to drop the massive federal fraud charges currently stacked heavily against him. I explicitly explain that the rigid judicial law must fully run its absolute proper course entirely unhindered by any lingering paternal sentiment. The immense crimes he maliciously committed require a severe, permanent legal consequence that I cannot simply erase with a convenient signature. I calmly watch his bruised eyes widen slightly as my uncompromising verdict permanently solidifies his impending federal incarceration. However, I immediately raise my free hand to firmly halt his impending tears. I look directly into his defeated eyes and reveal one final critical piece of highly guarded information. I slowly inform him that precisely 24 hours ago, I completely and anonymously paid off his entire towering illicit debt owed directly to the violent underground crime syndicate. I utilized a specialized blind corporate trust mechanism to cleanly wire the massive outstanding balance directly to the ruthless loan sharks, entirely wiping his dangerous slate completely clean. The heavily armed enforcers who violently attacked the wedding reception will absolutely never hunt him down or violently harm him inside the brutal federal prison environment. His physical life is now completely safe from the terrifying reach of the murderous mob. He will not constantly look over his shoulder fearing a sudden lethal retaliation from ruthless criminals. However, I firmly clarify that this extremely expensive financial intervention is absolutely not a pardon for his disgusting behavior. It is simply a highly necessary physical protection, ensuring he can safely survive his upcoming punishment. He must fully serve his mandatory 5-year federal prison sentence and actively face the harsh daily consequences of his incredibly reckless actions entirely on his own. He will finally experience the true heavy weight of personal accountability without any luxurious safety nets protecting his fragile ego. I explicitly declare that this absolute uncompromising boundary represents my very final vital lesson in genuine manhood. He must now forcefully rebuild his entire broken character from the absolute rock bottom upward, relying entirely upon his own internal resilience. I offer him absolutely zero remaining financial resources, simply providing him the basic physical safety required to actively endure his completely justified severe legal punishment starting today. Anthony listens intensely as my final unyielding verdict permanently and deeply registers within his mind. He violently weeps, pressing his deeply bruised face firmly against the thick, cold, separating glass. However, amidst his raw, agonizing tears, he slowly nods his head in absolute, complete acceptance. He instantly recognizes that this severe mandatory federal punishment effectively becomes his genuine salvation from an utterly toxic, morally bankrupt life. The crushing weight of his monumental failure is now entirely solely his own ultimate burden to carry. Our previously highly toxic and meshed father and son dynamic is now officially completely destroyed forever. I calmly stand up from the rigid metal chair and gently place the black receiver securely back onto its metallic hook. I firmly sever our direct physical communication completely and permanently. I turn away from the thick, scratched glass, leaving him entirely alone to face his impending harsh reality. I slowly walk back down the extremely bleak concrete corridor, feeling remarkably light and entirely unburdened. The massive towering wreckage of his arrogant, fraudulent empire has been ruthlessly cleared away completely. The resulting profound emotional emptiness leaves behind a perfectly clean, incredibly harsh foundation for his potential future rebirth eventually starting right now. The immediate aftermath of the federal arrests sends massive shockwaves directly through the financial sector. The incredibly public collapse of my son completely destabilizes his highly publicized tech startup. Overnight, the once promising corporate entity plummets into an absolute catastrophic freefall. The stock valuation disintegrates as panicked investors rapidly dump their shares to avoid the toxic association with federal fraud and violent underground syndicates. The sterile glass headquarters descends into pure chaotic panic as employees desperately fear for their impending unemployment. Smelling the blood in the turbulent corporate water, ruthless industry sharks immediately begin circling the wounded company. Aggressive venture capitalists and rival tech conglomerates launch a highly coordinated hostile buyout attempting to acquire the incredibly valuable proprietary assets for literal pennies on the dollar. They arrogantly view Anthony's monumental downfall as a prime opportunity to forcefully absorb his entire technological infrastructure while entirely discarding the ruined workforce. I sit quietly in my private study, monitoring the aggressive financial attacks actively unfolding across the global market. I watch these arrogant corporate scavengers violently tear at the vulnerable framework of the bleeding company. They operate with the exact same toxic, malicious greed that ultimately destroyed my pathetic son. They incorrectly assume the wounded startup is completely defenseless and entirely ready for a brutal corporate slaughter. However, they severely underestimate my profound dedication to structural integrity and my absolute intolerance for unearned financial exploitation. I absolutely refuse to let opportunistic parasites feast upon the shattered remains of this company here starting today. I firmly push through the incredibly heavy frosted glass doors and step directly into the exceptionally sleek modern boardroom of the deeply struggling tech firm. The massive mahogany table is currently surrounded by terrified executives and the corrupt board members that Harper aggressively installed during her brief, tyrannical reign. They look up in absolute shock as I calmly take my position at the absolute head of the polished table. I am not here to negotiate a polite compromise or offer a friendly corporate bailout. Armed with massive liquid capital aggressively deployed directly from my shielded trust and perfectly guided by my decades of uncompromising structural engineering expertise, I explicitly announce my absolute hostile takeover. I legally present the irrefutable financial documentation confirming that I have systematically purchased the overwhelming majority of their rapidly plummeting shares. I have successfully capitalized on the chaotic market panic to completely acquire the entire company outright. The hostile corporate sharks circling outside the glass walls have been completely outmaneuvered and entirely neutralized by my vastly superior financial precision. The room falls dead silent as the sheer magnitude of my total ownership permanently registers across their arrogant faces. I hold the absolute controlling interest and I wield my newfound corporate power with devastating lethal efficiency. I stare coldly at the treacherous board members who willfully facilitated Anthony's illegal actions and blindly approved Harper's toxic financial strategies. I do not offer them a single ounce of professional courtesy or any cowardly severance packages. I explicitly and immediately fire every single corrupt individual sitting at the massive mahogany table today. I strictly order them to pack their personal belongings and permanently vacate the premises within the next 15 minutes. The parasitic leeches who happily enabled my son's monumental downfall are entirely purged from the building. I watch them stand up with trembling hands, their pathetic entitlement completely obliterated by my unyielding command. I firmly reclaim the structural foundation of this broken enterprise, systematically preparing to actively rebuild the entire fraudulent infrastructure from the absolute ground upward, starting entirely fresh, building an incredibly powerful legacy immediately right here today. After the corrupt board members cowardly evacuate the room, the few remaining minority shareholders instantly begin to loudly protest my incredibly sudden, aggressive corporate ascension. They nervously exchange highly skeptical glances and vocally question the fundamental logic of allowing a 69-year-old retiree to completely command a deeply modern, innovative technological enterprise. They arrogantly assume my advanced physical age renders me entirely incapable of actively understanding their highly complex digital ecosystem or effectively managing their sophisticated software operations. I completely ignore their incredibly insulting ageist remarks and smoothly approach the massive presentation console situated at the far end of the long, polished table. I firmly plug my encrypted secure laptop directly into their main server and rapidly project the company's absolute core proprietary source code onto the enormous glowing display screen. I loudly command their absolute undivided attention. Operating with the absolute surgical precision of a master structural engineer, I systematically deconstruct their entire foundational software architecture piece by piece. I ruthlessly point out multiple incredibly catastrophic technical flaws and severe structural vulnerabilities that Anthony's highly inexperienced development team deliberately ignored simply to rapidly accelerate their artificial profit margins. I meticulously highlight the extremely dangerous critical load failures currently threatening to completely collapse their entire fragile digital network within mere months. I brutally expose how their desperate, greedy rush to market fundamentally compromised the absolute basic stability of their primary technological product, leaving their entire corporate future profoundly vulnerable to imminent catastrophic failure. The skeptical shareholders watch in absolute stunned silence as I effortlessly decode their highly complex programming language, translating the abstract digital code into entirely irrefutable structural mechanics. I do not simply break their flawed system down, I immediately provide the ultimate definitive solution. I confidently present a genuinely brilliant, incredibly cost-effective technical redesign that seamlessly patches every single glaring security vulnerability while vastly increasing their overall operational efficiency. I completely replace their highly toxic, unstable framework with a robust, incredibly solid engineering blueprint guaranteed to generate immense long-term sustainable corporate growth. I systematically demonstrate my profound absolute mastery over their entire technological domain, completely destroying any lingering foolish doubts regarding my sharp intellectual capabilities. I stand firmly before the massive glowing screen, projecting supreme authority, proving unequivocally that genuine foundational expertise easily transcends any specific medium. My brilliant analytical mind operates beyond their pathetic superficial expectations, completely securing my absolute dominance over this entire salvaged corporation permanently today. The massive boardroom falls absolutely dead silent for a long, breathless moment. The remaining corporate shareholders simply stare at the brightly glowing projection, entirely unable to articulate a single coherent counter-argument against my flawless mathematical logic. Suddenly, a single tentative clap breaks the heavy quiet, rapidly cascading into thunderous unified applause echoing throughout the entire glass facility. They instantly recognize the profound, undeniable value of genuine structural integrity over cheap, superficial marketing tricks. I successfully secure the entire technological company, completely absorbing their massive operational potential into my own strictly shielded portfolio. Over the following months, my personal wealth massively multiplies, incredibly far beyond its original substantial valuation. However, this immense newfound fortune is entirely governed by my absolute unwavering wisdom and profound moral integrity. My vast financial empire remains permanently completely out of reach from pathetic, greedy parasites and highly toxic corporate leeches forever. I stand completely victorious at the absolute pinnacle of an unyielding structural dynasty, completely forged by extreme personal discipline. I gaze out the towering glass windows overlooking the sprawling city below, perfectly content in my absolute, undeniable triumph. The weak, fragile framework they aggressively attempted to steal has been permanently replaced by unbreakable solid steel. The massive corporate victory secures my financial empire entirely, but my heart remains deeply anchored to the quiet coastal sanctuary. The aggressively greedy resort developers continuously flood my private legal channels with astronomical buyout offers for the 10 acres of prime waterfront real estate. I completely ignore their pathetic monetary bribes and formally reject every single desperate solicitation. I actively refuse to surrender the beautiful lake cabin to ruthless commercial predators. Instead, I immediately initiate a massive comprehensive renovation project across the entire pristine property. I hire a highly skilled team of trusted local contractors to systematically execute my incredibly ambitious architectural blueprint. We rapidly transform the rustic, quiet acreage into a highly advanced, elite technical and engineering training camp designed specifically for brilliantly minded, underprivileged minority youth. The construction crews work relentlessly under the warm sun, meticulously raising state-of-the-art laboratory facilities right alongside the peaceful natural shoreline. I personally oversee every single structural upgrade, ensuring the magnificent new buildings perfectly harmonize with the gorgeous surrounding forest. We build massive open-air workshops equipped with cutting-edge technology, seamlessly blending modern scientific innovation with the raw, rugged beauty of the ancient pine trees. My vast liquid capital actively funds the entire transformation entirely free from any restrictive corporate oversight or bureaucratic delay. I aggressively redirect my immense wealth to construct a powerful educational haven entirely dedicated to fostering genuine intellectual growth. The beautiful, quiet land transforms into a vibrant, bustling sanctuary, actively preparing marginalized young minds for brilliant, successful futures today. As I stand inside the freshly renovated main lodge, my fingers gently trace the remarkably smooth surface of the original exposed wooden beams. The profound historical narrative explicitly reveals that this specific beloved cabin was originally constructed entirely by hand over 8 long decades ago. My phenomenal grandfather was an incredibly resilient, completely untrained carpenter who boldly purchased this completely undeveloped lakeside acreage during an exceptionally hostile era. He faced extreme, vicious prejudice and relentless societal oppression every single day of his difficult life, but he completely refused to yield his sacred independence. He literally chopped down the towering pine trees himself, manually stripping the thick, rough bark to painstakingly erect this incredibly sturdy permanent shelter for his struggling family. He mixed the concrete foundation with his own severely calloused hands, permanently pouring his absolute sheer determination directly into the solid coastal soil. Keeping this extraordinarily precious land completely safe from any predatory corporate destruction is absolutely not about retaining massive financial wealth or leveraging prime real estate value. It is strictly about fiercely protecting our proud generational bloodline and properly honoring the immense sacrificial sweat of my brave ancestors. The extremely greedy corporate executives aggressively view these pristine 10 acres simply as highly profitable commercial inventory ready for immediate ruthless exploitation. They entirely fail to comprehend the immense, profound spiritual connection permanently binding my family directly to this gorgeous, quiet soil. They arrogantly assume that a sufficiently large monetary offer will eventually completely erode my deep moral principles and erase this incredibly important historical monument entirely. They are completely and fundamentally wrong about my absolute, unwavering dedication. I will aggressively defend every single inch of this hallowed ground forever, completely honoring the incredible, hard-working man who originally established our enduring family legacy. This beautiful, newly renovated sanctuary actively stands today as a permanent, indestructible testament to his monumental struggles and brilliant, lasting triumph. Every modern technological upgrade carefully installed by the brilliant youth perfectly complements the deep historical strength deeply embedded inside these ancient wooden walls, keeping his brave spirit fully alive and vibrantly strong entirely forever today here. The massive global resort corporation is absolutely furious regarding my unyielding permanent refusal to immediately sell the incredibly valuable coastal property. They rapidly realize their highly aggressive financial intimidation tactics have completely failed against my strict legal boundaries. The angry billionaire developers entirely shift their malicious strategy and actively launch a deeply ruthless, highly coordinated media smear campaign maliciously targeting my personal reputation. They deploy expensive corporate publicists to completely flood local television stations and regional newspapers with absolutely venomous, misleading propaganda. The heavily funded advertisements viciously paint me as an incredibly stubborn, profoundly selfish old man who is maliciously halting vital economic progress within our struggling community. The deceptive television broadcasts explicitly claim that my absolute refusal to surrender the pristine lake cabin is directly preventing the immediate creation of thousands of incredibly lucrative construction jobs and massive sustainable tax revenues for the struggling county. They aggressively hire corrupt local politicians to loudly condemn my private conservation trust, publicly arguing that my personal sentimentality is actively devastating the regional commercial economy. The wealthy executives maliciously leak manipulated financial documents, entirely falsely suggesting that my minority engineering camp is simply a massive fraudulent tax evasion scheme, specifically designed to selfishly hoard generational wealth. They aggressively weaponize the desperate working-class citizens, deliberately inciting intense public outrage against my completely peaceful sanctuary. My quiet, serene neighborhood is instantly flooded with angry protesting crowds holding incredibly hostile signs demanding my immediate corporate surrender. The greedy developers arrogantly assume that this intense, highly manufactured public pressure will successfully terrorize me into finally signing their incredibly pathetic buyout contracts today. They firmly believe they can violently shatter my profound personal resolve by completely destroying my previously spotless community reputation. The vicious corporate sharks aggressively circle my beautiful, quiet sanctuary, absolutely convinced their immense financial power will inevitably triumph over my strict moral integrity. They entirely fail to comprehend that my deep structural engineering background has perfectly trained me to absolutely thrive under immense crushing physical and psychological pressure. Their incredibly loud, pathetic media circus only forcefully solidifies my unyielding personal commitment to permanently protect my grandfather's sacred, enduring legacy. I completely ignore their incredibly hostile television broadcasts and loudly aggressive political protests, remaining absolutely steadfast and perfectly calm. The magnificent defensive foundation I meticulously constructed remains completely impenetrable, securely protecting my brilliant youthful students from any malicious external interference forever, starting right here today. I absolutely refuse to cowardly release a defensive, sanitized public relations statement directly addressing their pathetic manufactured corporate lies. Instead, I confidently invite a highly prominent, heavily respected local news anchor to exclusively broadcast live directly from the magnificent cabin's highly anticipated grand opening ceremony. The seasoned investigative journalist completely bypasses the angry, screaming protesters swarming outside the thick iron gates and enters my perfectly restored sanctuary. The massive, heavy wooden doors swing wide open, instantly revealing an incredibly breathtaking, inspirational scene perfectly broadcasting across the entire state. The television cameras brilliantly capture dozens of incredibly bright, passionate, underprivileged minority kids happily building highly complex advanced robotics directly inside my grandfather's beautifully renovated historic woodshop. The incredibly vibrant, focused children joyfully demonstrate their remarkable technical engineering projects while openly praising the incredibly empowering educational sanctuary I proudly provided. The undeniably beautiful, powerful visual evidence instantly entirely obliterates the pathetic, malicious corporate smear campaign, completely exposing the greedy billionaire developers as absolutely desperate, ruthless frauds. The massive viewing audience immediately passionately rallies directly behind our inspiring protective mission. The entire community passionately applauds our monumental, enduring victory today forever, completely cementing our profound, beautiful, permanent legacy right here now, forever today. Exactly 1 year has passed since the vibrant grand opening of the engineering sanctuary permanently cemented my family legacy. The harsh winter winds howl against the thick wooden walls of my renovated coastal cabin. I sit quietly in my favorite worn leather armchair positioned directly in front of the roaring stone fireplace. The intense crackling flames cast dancing orange shadows across the quiet room, providing a deep, comforting warmth against the freezing external chill. My calloused hands rest firmly on my lap, holding a remarkably thin white envelope. The stark, heavy black ink officially stamped across the top left corner plainly identifies its origin as the maximum security federal correctional facility located 300 miles upstate. This is the very first piece of physical correspondence I have received from Anthony since the brutal day Logan physically escorted him off this exact property. For 12 long consecutive months, total absolute silence has heavily defined our severed relationship. I deliberately maintained an impenetrable barrier, entirely focusing my immense energy on cultivating the brilliant young minds currently thriving within my engineering camp. I slowly slide a sharp brass letter opener underneath the sealed paper flap, cutting through the thick adhesive with a single fluid motion. I extract the folded handwritten pages, feeling an unexpected tightening in my chest. The familiar sloping handwriting instantly brings forth a rushing flood of deeply buried memories. I adjust my reading glasses and unfold the crisp paper, preparing to confront the isolated thoughts of my incarcerated son today. Anthony begins his vulnerable letter by meticulously describing his structured daily routine working deep inside the massive prison carpentry shop. He explains that his soft manicured hands are now heavily calloused, constantly covered in rough sawdust and sticky wood glue. Stripped completely bare of his expensive suits and entirely isolated from his shallow network of fake friends, he writes about discovering a truly profound, unexpected mental clarity. The relentless toxic pursuit of artificial digital wealth that once completely consumed his entire existence has been entirely replaced by the raw physical reality of shaping solid timber. He eloquently details the deep, quiet peace he finally experiences, while methodically sanding down rough wooden edges or precisely measuring complex structural joints. For the first time in his adult life, he genuinely understands the immense intrinsic value of honest manual labor and pure physical sweat. He clearly writes that the harsh, punishing environment entirely broke down his massive, fragile ego, forcing him to confront the dark, hideous monster his blinding greed had ultimately created. Anthony openly admits that the loud, chaotic noise of his former fraudulent empire completely drowned out any genuine sense of personal morality. Surrounded entirely by cold steel bars and highly disciplined correctional officers, he finally comprehends the monumental damage he maliciously inflicted upon our family legacy. He describes successfully building a small, sturdy oak chair last week, expressing an immense, genuine pride in constructing something entirely real and undeniably tangible. He explicitly states that he no longer foolishly craves the hollow validation of wealthy elite socialites or ruthless corporate scavengers. The painful daily process of strictly manual creation has actively forced him to completely reevaluate his entire fundamental definition of actual authentic success. He writes that every single swing of the heavy steel hammer actively chips away another toxic layer of his former massive entitlement. The beautifully crafted letter contains absolutely no pathetic, desperate requests for legal appeals or any hidden manipulative pleas for future financial salvation. He simply shares his profound, painful, ongoing transformation, absolutely guaranteeing that his severe federal punishment has miraculously become his ultimate necessary salvation today. I slowly lower the crisp, handwritten letter, resting it gently upon my knee, while staring deeply into the roaring orange flames. The vivid, detailed words echo throughout the quiet living room, forcing me to intensely evaluate my current emotional state. The profound, deep scar of his horrific betrayal still aches within my chest. I forcefully remind myself that simple forgiveness is absolutely not a magical sudden eraser wiping away severe generational trauma overnight. The absolute sheer magnitude of his monstrous financial crimes shattered my fundamental paternal trust, permanently destroying the blind, unconditional affection I previously harbored. I sit still inside the warm cabin, debating whether I should schedule a physical visit to the highly secure federal correctional facility. I am intensely wrestling with the dark, suffocating ghost of our toxic shared past while aggressively analyzing the stark, promising reality of his current isolated present. I continuously weigh the severe, undeniable pain of his previous vicious actions directly against the sincere vulnerability beautifully expressed within these folded pages today. My strict analytical engineering mind demands concrete structural evidence of genuine, long-lasting personal growth before I can commit to any potential future emotional investment. I clearly recognize that simply answering this vulnerable letter actively represents a significant, monumental shift in our previously entirely severed dynamic. The brutal, unforgiving silence I carefully maintained for 12 consecutive months successfully served its exact designated purpose, entirely forcing him to confront his own massive destructive demons alone. Now, however, the absolute, utter devastation of his former fraudulent empire has produced a bare, clean slate. I must meticulously decide if slowly opening a highly restricted, controlled channel of direct communication will benefit his continuing, authentic moral rehabilitation, or simply foolishly expose my heavily guarded, peaceful sanctuary to future potential manipulation again. The intense, flickering fire perfectly mirrors my internal, complex, psychological turmoil, rapidly shifting between cold, unyielding, strict boundaries and cautious, deeply buried paternal hope. I heavily ponder the profound philosophical difference between completely enabling a toxic, dependent child and tentatively supporting a thoroughly broken, repentant man, actively trying to rebuild his shattered soul from scratch. The incredibly long, arduous journey toward any potential mutual reconciliation will absolutely require immense, unwavering patience, strict, rigorous emotional discipline, and entirely undeniable, verified actions, entirely replacing cheap, empty verbal promises forever. I deliberately fold the white paper, carefully absorbing the immense, profound weight of my absolutely critical, impending decision tonight. I slowly reach across the small wooden table and confidently pick up a heavy silver fountain pen. My hand remains remarkably steady as I firmly press the sharp metal nib directly against a pristine sheet of blank ivory stationery. I decisively conclude that scheduling a physical visit is entirely premature, remaining absolutely determined to keep my protective boundaries strictly firm today. He must continuously prove his developing integrity through sustained isolated effort without exclusively relying upon my immediate paternal validation. I will not quickly rush to eagerly rescue him from the highly necessary agonizing discomfort of his ongoing profound moral evolution. I meticulously write a single incredibly powerful sentence directly answering his deep philosophical realization. Do the work right, wood never lies. The dark ink dries quickly against the thick textured paper. I carefully slide the solitary page into a fresh envelope, completely sealing it with absolute unwavering conviction. I am not instantly offering him total unconditional forgiveness or a magical sudden return to our previous wealthy elite lifestyle. However, by explicitly acknowledging his honest physical labor, a remarkably slow, highly cautious, sturdy bridge finally begins to slowly, beautifully form across the massive, devastating chasm, completely dividing us entirely forever. The bright, vibrant sun slowly dips below the remarkably calm surface of the expansive South Carolina lake, perfectly casting a rich golden hue over the entire sprawling training center. I stand quietly on the freshly stained wooden porch, deeply breathing in the crisp, intoxicating scent of ancient pine needles and cool, fresh water. The profound structural transformation of this incredibly sacred family land is absolutely complete today. The rustic, magnificent buildings directly surrounding my grandfather's original cabin look entirely spectacular, standing firmly against the fading twilight sky. I gently run my calloused fingers along the sturdy wooden railing, thoroughly appreciating the immense enduring strength deeply embedded within this beautiful coastal property. The quiet evening breeze rustles softly through the tall, towering trees, offering a deeply comforting, familiar melody that instantly calms my analytical mind. I have meticulously guarded this incredibly precious generational sanctuary, entirely protecting our proud legacy from absolute greedy destruction. The incredibly harsh winter winds have fully subsided, completely replaced by the incredibly gentle warmth of a highly promising, beautiful spring evening. I look out across the perfectly pristine water, reflecting upon the immense, arduous journey requiring absolute strict discipline and unwavering personal resolve. My quiet waterfront home no longer represents a deeply isolated, lonely retreat. It now actively pulses with incredible, vibrant life, purposefully serving as a genuinely powerful educational beacon for brilliantly minded, underprivileged youth. I remain perfectly still, simply soaking in the profound, absolute peace washing completely over my heavily guarded spirit right here today. Logan smoothly pulls his dark vehicle directly into the freshly paved gravel driveway, carrying a highly expensive bottle of incredibly fine aged bourbon. He steps out wearing a deeply satisfied smile, walking confidently toward the wooden porch to join me. We comfortably sit together in two sturdy rocking chairs, calmly reviewing the absolute definitive aftermath of our meticulous legal retaliation. The once extremely arrogant Harper and her entire highly corrupt wealthy family are currently serving incredibly hard, severe time locked deep inside a maximum security federal prison facility. Their massive, fraudulent financial empire was entirely dismantled, utterly destroying their incredibly toxic fake socialite status forever. Their previously immaculate reputation is now permanently synonymous with massive corporate greed and absolute disgusting criminal deceit. Meanwhile, my son Anthony remains completely isolated, remaining entirely dedicated to quietly rehabilitating his severely shattered soul. Working strictly inside the prison carpentry shop, he slowly learns the immense profound value of genuine, honest sweat. My beautifully reclaimed tech company is now thriving incredibly far beyond its original substantial projections. Under my strict, disciplined leadership, the innovative software infrastructure operates flawlessly, generating completely unprecedented corporate revenue, completely devoid of any shallow marketing gimmicks. We boldly redirected those immense newfound corporate profits, entirely establishing a massive permanent financial endowment specifically designed to fully fund Diana's ambitious scholarship program completely. This incredibly robust financial pipeline actively guarantees entirely free elite technical education for hundreds of truly deserving underprivileged minority students annually. Logan silently pours the rich amber liquid into two heavy crystal glasses, officially acknowledging our incredibly absolute, undisputed triumph tonight. I gratefully accept the perfectly aged bourbon, thoroughly savoring the highly complex, smooth flavor warmly settling deep within my chest. Every single loose end has been flawlessly, permanently secured, entirely reflecting my strict, demanding structural engineering background. We effectively completely neutralize the absolute worst parasitic elements, intentionally securing a vastly brighter, strictly ethical future for everyone actively involved. I smile incredibly deeply, looking completely forward toward the remarkable, absolute lasting legacy, permanently cemented perfectly here today, forever, completely and entirely without any fail right now in this exact moment. I slowly lean back perfectly, relaxing into the comforting embrace of the heavy wooden rocking chair, deeply reflecting upon this absolutely incredible personal journey. I am definitively no longer the entirely marginalized, completely forgotten old man, quietly wearing a highly unfashionable, dusty suit. I am no longer the incredibly weak, passive father, completely ignored and severely disrespected by his own deeply arrogant, treacherous blood. The immense, profound transformation I actively orchestrated required absolutely ruthless emotional precision and entirely uncompromising mental discipline. I aggressively took an incredibly sharp surgical scalpel directly to my entirely compromised existence, methodically cutting away the massive, suffocating layers of toxic deceit. I ruthlessly excised the incredibly dangerous, infectious rot that maliciously threatened to entirely consume our entire family history. I actively executed this incredibly painful, destructive process, not out of pathetic, blind anger, but to entirely successfully save the beautiful, strong roots of my incredibly enduring legacy. The greedy parasites who desperately attempted to violently strip my wealth entirely underestimated my brilliant analytical mind. They incorrectly assumed my quiet, humble demeanor actively equated to pathetic, severe cognitive weakness, entirely missing the vast, undeniable structural strength permanently residing deeply within my focused soul. I systematically, completely dismantled their entire sophisticated criminal network, directly utilizing their very own highly flawed manipulative tactics. I successfully, completely inverted their malicious financial traps, perfectly securing my immense wealth while entirely destroying their profoundly arrogant, superficial empire forever. My ultimate, profound personal satisfaction entirely stems from this beautiful, flawless execution of pure, undeniable truth, perfectly conquering their massive, pathetic, fragile lies. I deliberately found my absolute deepest, genuine peace absolutely not in pathetic, highly destructive, chaotic vengeance, but strictly in flawlessly delivering pure, unyielding, permanent structural justice today. I carefully preserved the exact, profound moral integrity beautifully passed down directly from my remarkably hard-working, deeply resilient grandfather, entirely honoring his immense historical sacrifice. The spectacular, beautiful training facility, dynamically standing completely behind me, actively serves as an entirely indestructible physical monument, boldly honoring that exact, enduring, powerful, generational promise. Every single brilliant, underprivileged student currently thriving perfectly inside those freshly renovated walls explicitly represents my ultimate, incredibly, absolute, undeniable, stunning victory over their entirely pathetic, destructive, monumental corporate greed. I simply gaze incredibly deeply into the incredibly vast, beautifully starry southern night sky, completely experiencing absolute, perfect, immense, untroubled personal tranquility, entirely reigning flawlessly supreme, right here tonight, completely and entirely forever. Suddenly, the bright exterior lights of the massive wooden workshop loudly flick on, brilliantly illuminating the darkening landscape. The incredibly joyful sound of highly passionate young students genuinely laughing mixed with the powerful, steady humming of advanced machinery beautifully fills the crisp night air. I slowly turn my head, completely absorbing the incredibly vibrant scene actively unfolding perfectly across the incredibly pristine coastal property. I proudly grasp my heavy crystal glass, feeling the remarkably smooth surface securely pressing directly against my calloused palm. I slowly raise the perfectly aged amber bourbon, highly deliberately, toward Logan, entirely acknowledging our spectacularly flawless victory tonight. We absolutely successfully protected this profoundly sacred historical land utterly defeating the incredibly toxic parasitic threats attempting severe destruction. The incredibly necessary, deeply silent adjustment is now entirely, absolutely, completely, officially finished, forever, right here tonight. The incredibly toxic, superficial rot has been meticulously, permanently, surgically removed directly from our incredibly proud generational bloodline. The absolutely brilliant young minds actively working inside currently actively forge a remarkably powerful, secure, incredibly bright future entirely built strictly upon pure, undeniable merit. Our incredibly massive, beautiful defensive foundation remains absolutely permanently, perfectly, unconditionally, completely unbreakable forever, standing incredibly, exceptionally, remarkably strong. If you found William's unyielding pursuit of justice and legacy inspiring, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of resilience, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upcoming update.